And we'll look for Tanya to join us, I hope.
I'm here.
Oh, goody, goody. I just saw you. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I've been here for a few minutes.
Oh, sorry.
Tanya, how did you put your picture up there?
I don't know. I think it's my Google. I think that's my Google profile.
Yeah, I think I'd like to do that. All
Yeah,
right.
no, I don't have a good place for me to meet, so I don't like to have my camera on. Unless you guys really, unless it offends you guys, I guess.
No, it's a
No.
very nice picture.
No, it's a
Thank you.
gorgeous picture.
You're always smiling.
That's my headshot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, girls and boys, we are ready to roll. Andy?
We are live.
Welcome, everybody, to the Planning Board meeting of November 4th, 2020. I will start with a roll call, as that's required for any online meeting. Alden Clark,
Here.
Beth DeLille,
Here.
Ann Gardner,
Here.
Tanya Hartford,
Here.
Leah McGavern is absent, Rick Tainter,
Here.
MJ Verde,
Here.
Don Walters,
Here.
Bonnie Sontag here, Linda Guthrie is our note taker, and I believe we have Andrew Fort, Planning Director, and Caitlin Sullivan, Planner, with us. Let me start with reminding people, and for those who are here with us for the first time that during virtual meetings, you can access materials off the city website. Even though some of the documentation we will be reviewing in a shared screen setting that Director Port will put up. You can go to the city website and under Government, click on Planning Board, where you can see the link to the agenda for tonight's meeting. There you'll find a link to each application on the agenda and all supporting materials. The most recent documents are at the bottom of the list. I'll go through the agenda and then we will get started with the first item on the agenda. We have one public hearing for the Institution for Savings, site plan review, ITIF special permit, and DOD special permit. After that, we have other business, minor site plan review for 0 Parker Street, a request for a minor modification at 102-104 High Street, a request for a minor modification at 47 Story Avenue, and the request for a release of covenant at for the reserve at Bashaw Farm will be continued until November 18th. Afterward, we'll approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting and discuss a zoning amendment, 6C final draft review, and then have any updates that the planning director has for us. That's the agenda, so we'll get started with the first item, which is the Institution for Savings, which has been continued several times, most recently, this says September 16th, but I believe
that's a typo. Apologies.
I do believe that's wrong. We heard from them at our last meeting.
October 21st.
Yes, thank you. I just saw that. Thank you. All right, Attorney Mead, I turn it over to you and your applicant.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the board. Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport, on behalf of the Institution for Savings. With me here this evening is Mike Jones, the CEO, and Kim Rock, the COO, and all of the consultants that are working on this project should the board have any questions. Specifically, Christopher Angelakis and Shreya Shah of ARC Architects, Charlie Ware and Nick Betts of Meridian Associates, Ron Muller of Muller Associates, Traffic Engineer, Sean Fitch of City Lifts, and Dr. Judith Selwyn, Architect Historian. At the last meeting, the board requested a number of detailed pieces of information and requested that we look into a couple of matters. Additionally, the board was waiting on an advisory opinion from the Historic Commission. Tonight, I will address the advisory opinion of the commission, which was issued last week by the chair. Then Nick and Charlie will review the very few changes on the site plan. Then Christopher and I will go over the detailed information requested by several board members, basically a comparison of various things within the neighborhood. Then Christopher and Shreya will review the updated model and answer any additional questions. The model shows some of the new information that the board requested. And then I will wrap it up and we can continue to address any further questions or issues that the board has. So when the applicant met with the Historic Commission on October 22nd, in that meeting, the planning board should be aware that the chair did not bring the commission to a vote nor declare a consensus, notwithstanding what is said in the report. Indeed, 2 of the members spoke in support of the redesign, 2 members spoke in opposition, and the chair did not commit to a position at the meeting. The report to this board gave no vote, given no vote was taken or consensus reached, should have reflected the entire breadth of what occurred at the meeting. Upon review of the audio of the meeting, the board should be aware of the specific discussions. So Andy, if you could go to the next slide, please. What was actually said at the Historic Commission based upon the audio recording, I've taken some excerpts out of the commission meeting for the board. Mr. Richards exclaimed that the goal tonight was to go around with his fellow board members and hear and collect their thoughts so that he can compile them into a third advisory review. Then Glenn Richards mentioned size concerns, parking system raising the height, asks about the possibility of bringing parking down a few feet. Attorney Mead answers this, explaining how that was not possible due to the various factors, including the fire department not allowing this. Mr. Richards then talked about attic space questions. He asked if the IFS would consider different roof pitches. Christopher Angelakis responds, explaining how the proposed roof pitch was determined by looking at various pitches and how that proposed pitch fits within the neighborhood. Mr. Richards then responds to Mr. Angelakis, I do understand the bit about the pitch. I know actually in some of the older homes, the pitch is shallower, but most of the houses in the neighborhood are of a vintage that have a pitch that is pretty close to what you've got there in the proposed plan. So I would agree with that. Glenn Richards says, Mark Griffin's house is smaller than average, a little unfair to use this as a comparison, but differences in height of windows on the second floor of the IFS proposed building next to his is very noticeable. That's the end of Mr. Richards' comments and questions at that time. Could you go to the next slide, please, Andy? Then Mr. Morgan begins. I agree entirely with Mr. Angelakis, the architect. I think that here is an interpretation of residential palette of materials and proportions, end quote. Mr. Morgan then says, overall, I find the proportions, unless you really scrutinize the dimensions of all those openings, they still feel residential. Glenn Richards in the background says, yeah. Then Mr. Morgan says, I think that the architect has achieved what I thought were critical features in order to make the building more historical in its setting. Mr. Morgan's only question was about the window trim that was answered by Mr. Angelakis and that he said it could easily be addressed. Could you go to the next slide, please? Then Christopher Fay began his comments around 53 minutes into the recording. He says, looks great, just doesn't look great here. He says, then aerial view is shocking to me. Christopher Fay adds, nothing new to add, just don't support this. Glenn Richards asked Chris Fay for clarification. The proposal does not look great in the content of this little neighborhood. Chris Fay responds that it fits the city, just doesn't fit here, you know, gives examples of other location where he thinks it should fit, including the Story Ave IFS location. Chris Fay goes on to say the neighborhood doesn't support it, as in the neighborhood setting, not the abutters themselves. Chris Fay then says, zone commercial doesn't mean you have to do it. And the next slide, please. Then Ron Zambia comments begin. Ron says, have reached an impasse. Last 2 speakers, Joe Morgan and Chris Fay, were a perfect example of that. Ron goes on to say, the proposal that holds the most promise for compromise is the one we've been looking at from the outside looks like just another neighborhood residential building, or to rephrase, a cluster of residential buildings in the neighborhood. Ron Zamba provides, the architect has gone to some considerable lengths to make this not just another residential looking neighborhood, but a residential neighborhood that fits with the buildings on Otis Street and Prospect Street. So I would disagree with Commissioner Chris Fay on this and agree with Commissioner Joe Morgan, especially now that the ridge height has been lowered. Maybe we can have another look at this option from and form a majority around it. Glenn Richards provides, if not for the parking system, driving the extra height of the first floor of the proposal, Moore would agree with that. Then he adds, I would agree with both you, Ron Zamba and Joe Morgan, that they have done a good job of at least stylistically making it much more harmonious, fit in the neighborhood, especially when contrasting it to the original proposals. Could you go to the next slide, please? And then Patricia Pecknick's comments begin. Ms. Pecknick says, the Department of the Interior continually emphasizes the need to protect the historic setting and context of the property, the building site and environment, and other surrounding historic buildings. She continues and emphasizes that she is speaking just as myself and not the entire commission. Ms. Pecknick says the things she likes about the project are irrelevant because after reading all the Secretary of the Interior materials and the DOD ordinance, quote, applying them to this project as a member of this commission can do no other than conclude too much height, volume to be shoehorned into a historic neighborhood context, don't know the solution. She does not know what an example of an addition on that site would satisfy her interpretation of what would abide by the Secretary of the Interior standards. Ms. Pecknick gives her interpretation of how the FRESS test, the fresh test, would be applied to the proposal. Then Glenn Richards responds to Patricia Pecknick's comments and talks about how the commission is in an annoying position with all the work that was put into this by all the parties involved, and yet there appeared to be these insurmountable things going on. Mr. Richards adds, I've asked a couple of questions. It's an interesting situation. I will compile all of this, wrap this up. It's a tough one. I'll give one last brief opportunity for Attorney Mead and Chris Angelakis to make any closing remarks. Glenn Richards, after those comments, say, I think we're good. It's been a long haul. Historical Commission will do its best to provide whatever meaningful guidance we can to the planning board in that report. If you go to the next slide, please. The commission meeting was mixed, with Mr. Richards himself not expressing a position, rather providing several complimentary remarks. I would ask this board to take the comments for what they are and not as presented by Mr. Richards, which is not representative of the actual discussion of the commission. So with that, Andy, if you go to the next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Charlie to talk a little bit about a couple of changes that occurred in the site plan. And this is the existing conditions plan.
Everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is Nick Betts with Meridian Associates. We were the civil engineers for the project. And Andy, if you want to zoom into the parking lot there on the top corner. Perfect. So there was a comment by one of the board members at the last meeting about the number of handicap spaces. So we kind of re-reviewed the latest and greatest ADA requirements, and as a result, added 2 additional handicap spaces to meet the requirements. So now there's a total of 3 handicap spaces. With that, one of those is required to be a van accessible space, which means that there needs to be an adjacent 8-foot wide access aisle. So the 2 handicap spaces that you're seeing on the right side of the existing parking lot there, that striped one in the middle meets that requirement for the 8-foot wide access aisle. To accommodate this additional space that we've added to the right side of the existing parking there, we did have to reduce the size of that small curbed island there. We've been referring to it as the existing nubbin right next to where it says one way. So we reduced that by 3 feet to get that additional handicap space in there. And then we've marked the parallel space closer to the building there as the 3rd handicap space. So now that we have the three, we're meeting the ADA requirements for this amount of parking.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Ms. Delisle, for bringing that to everybody's attention and having us re-review that. Before we go through the facts, comparison facts, which the board requested, there were two issues, two questions actually that the chair asked for us to look at prior to the, at the last meeting. One was to close off the Prospect Street egress altogether, and asked whether or not, the chair asked whether or not we could add another level of parking below grade. So we first reached out to the fire department to see what their position was on those proposed changes. And due to the concerns of the fire department, the bank is not proposing those changes. The board has received an email that I provided in my package, and I believe Deputy Bradbury provided that directly as well, where he states he would not approve those changes because he did not want to back out onto State Street once into the parking lot and was concerned about the movement within the parking lot. And two, he was not going to fight fires possibility in 2 levels below grade. So if you go to the next slide, Andy. So Christopher might have to chime in with me on some of these, but I believe it was Member Walters who asked us for a number of specifics about the comparisons that we were actually making and that you could see in the model. And he wanted actually the specifics. So we had Meridian, the engineers go out on site and take some measurements to the extent that we could take them from the public property. Otherwise, they were either taken from the assessor's records or by visual, like the parking lot behind the building. So first is the majority, this is the eave height that we've talked about. So the majority of the building along Prospect Street is at 25 feet. That which is not is the entranceway, of course, and the on the corner of Otis and Prospect. The residential structures along Prospect Street from 11 to 21 have an eve height of 23 feet 9 inches. The proposed entry on Prospect Street is 15 feet 6 inches. The residential structure at 9 Prospect Street, directly across the street, is at 16 feet 6 inches with an eve height of 9 feet 2 inches. So the eve height of the proposed new construction is comparable to the abutting structures on Prospect Street. If you can go to the next slide, Andy. The length of the facades. The 2 delineated facades of the proposed structure along Prospect Street are 36 feet 7 inches long. The facade at 11 to 13 Prospect Street is 42 feet 8 inches long. The facade at 15 to 17 Prospect Street is 42 feet 6 inches long. The facade at 19 to 21 Prospect Street is 41 feet 10 inches long. The delineated gable end section of the building along Otis is at 28 feet 8 inches long. The length of the facades along Otis at 16 Prospect is 40 feet long. The length of the facade at 3 Otis, right next to the building, is 30 feet long. And the length of the facade at 9 Otis is 46 feet long. Christopher and Schreier will point these out when they go through the model, but the conclusion is that the proposed building has been divided into distinct sections that are comparable or compatible with the existing surrounding buildings. Go to the next slide, please. Then we wanted to talk about the depth of the structure. So the depth of the segment of the proposed structure as delineated by the gable roof designs are 28 feet 8 inches along Prospect. The depth of the structures from 11 to 21 Prospect Street are 40 feet. The proposed structure has been divided into distinct sections that are not as deep as existing structures along Prospect Street. The footprint. The average of all the adjacent structures, excuse me, is 1,942 square feet. If you remove 93 State Street, the average is 1,773 square feet. So the brick connector that's proposed is 2,325 square feet. The East Prospect Street gable is 1,095 square feet. The West Prospect Street gable is 1,095 square feet. The Otis Garden Gable is 1,795 square feet, and the Otis one story is 900 square feet. So the average perceived footprint of the structures together are 1,432 square feet as compared to the average along the neighborhood of 1,773 square feet. The proposed structure has been divided into distinct sections comparable in footprint to the adjacent structures along Prospect Street and Otis Place. Again, we'll point this out when we go through the model. You go through the next. So then there was some questions about sidewalk widths. The bank side of Prospect Street is 6 feet. Along Otis, it's 5 feet 6 inches. The residential side of Prospect Street ranges from 6 feet to 7 feet 2 inches. And along Otis, it ranges from 4 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 11 inches. I would note that some of the sidewalk along the residential side of Prospect Street is actually paved all the way to the structures, but that is not the public sidewalk. All of the sidewalks on the south side of Prospect Street are of similar width to the remainder of the sidewalks in the neighborhood. And you could go next, Andy. So then the question is setbacks. The proposal has a setback along Prospect Street of 0.3 feet. The residential side of Prospect Street, the setbacks range from 1 feet 8 inches to 2 feet 11 inches between State and Fruit Street. The proposal along Otis varies from 2 feet to 3 feet at the 1-story section and varies from 0.3 feet to 7 feet 10 inches at the gable end section. The residents on the eastern side of Otis vary from 9 inches to 4 feet 2 inches. And the residents along the western side adjacent to the project range from 1 foot 6 inches to 11 feet 6 inches up to Garden Street. The proposed structure meets the required setbacks under the zoning ordinance, and the setbacks in the neighborhood are similar to that of the proposed structure. So before we go through Christopher and Shreya's changes in the model and the plans, we have been talking a lot about various terms that are architectural terms in the ordinance. And so what I thought we would do is I would just put the definition of those up according to what is in the ordinance and the Secretary of the Interior guidelines. So what is scale? Scale refers to how we perceive or judge the size of something compared to a standard, such as a 1/4 inch equals a foot, or something compared to something else. What is massing? A term in architecture that refers to a relationship between the parts and the shape, size, and location of a building or a site. And then what is size? The literal dimension of a thing measured with common standards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the architects who are going to go over the new line drawings, and then, well, they're not actually new line drawings, but they'll point out any changes that were made, and then perhaps have the model available.
Thank you, Lisa. I think if you were to scrutinize these plans, you'll see that on the plans, there's nothing terribly different. I think where you're going to see things that we adjusted by request will be on further drawings. So unless there's anyone who has anything to say about these plans, I think we can click through them very quickly. Just for anyone who's on this who hasn't seen it, that was the ground floor plan. This is the second floor plan. We can click through. And yeah, I think we can, if we can back up, Andy, to the elevations, I think it's worth looking at the previous elevation. One more back. Oops, do we not have it? Okay. If you zoom into the bottom right elevation, one of the things we did was to, at the request of folks on the Historical Board Commission, is to kind of look at our drawing line weights and show the window trim more clearly as it's intended. So I don't know, Andy, if you can zoom in one more time. I'm not sure if that's possible. But just to show you, we adjusted the line weights to show the type of window trim. This would be painted wood window trim and sill. again, making dialogue and relationships to how that is working on within the houses in the neighborhood. When Attorney Mead is talking about delineated facades, I think it's important to say that the delineated facades are the facades in which read as a singular building. So for instance, on the right side of this drawing, you might see 2 delineated facades with a reveal in between. And on the left side of this drawing, you're seeing the gable end of a delineated facade. And if you go back and look at those dimensions, if you were to go back and look at those dimensions, that's what those delineated facades are referring to. We can go straight to the model views. And again, we looked at making sure that window trim showed up more clearly. I believe we have a detail a little further of window trim later on. But if you can click through these, Andy. Oh, there's that long facade. I'm going to reiterate this one more time. If you can zoom into the bottom left portion of the addition. Yes, thank you. So again, the delineated facade that we were talking about being the clapboard massings with the 4 windows each across are broken into masses that read like houses. And so that length of building was very carefully chosen to make sure that it was harmonious with the other length of facades of the buildings being generally smaller than the length of the facades of the buildings, but of course not as small as some of the very, very small houses, 2 in particular that are direct abutters. Okay, thank you. We can move on to the model. Again, the section hasn't changed, but you can refer to this for some of the dimensions that Attorney Mead had discussed. Same with this section. This is just the longitudinal section going roughly east-west. I don't think we need to revisit these much more, but they're here for anyone's reference, the 4 times a year that we showed shadow studies. And what we did with the model, besides, one of the things that was requested was to populate the model with vehicles. And I'll just explain the methodology of how we did this. We actually, if you were to go today and look at Google Earth, we actually put cars everywhere that Google Earth shows cars today. We didn't invent anything. So if you can click through these, Andy, relatively rapidly. So these cars we're not placing them on our will. We place them where Google Earth shows cars are. We did add a couple of cars in this view right here. We did add a couple of cars nearer to the corner because we have an uninterrupted curb there that would likely accept parked cars. If you can hold here for a second, we added some detail here into some of the backyard structures of a couple of the houses here. Garden walls, some vegetation, some materials. It's a further kind of adding scale to it. Yep, you can click through. And as you can, we put materials as they exist there. There is a driveway in between these 2 houses, so we represent that. There's a parking lot directly behind the house to the left, and there's a small, I wouldn't call it a yard, but there's a small unpaved area behind the house to the right here. And these are just the overall. So we can see where we placed, you can see where we placed the cars. And there's one more aerial. Again, you can see the parking lot in the back representing some more of the materials. And I believe there's one more. Yes. So we wanted to, this is a new view that maybe it hasn't been seen. I think most of the board members were able to see the model being manipulated last time to the point that you could have seen the window trim, but this is just a detail in a still that we can see the window trim and its relationship to all the other architectural elements. And those are the things that we worked on and updated in response to the comments that we heard, both from this board and actually just from this board.
Thank you, Christopher. So I think there's one more slide, Andy. So in conclusion, the property is located in the B2 zoning district, which of course includes those properties between Prospect, Garden, and Otis as well. The City Council, in adopting the B2 zoning district in 1978, recognized the importance of a thriving commercial district, which was side by side with existing residential uses and structures. The proposal is not unusual, rather consistent with the land use patterns and setting of the B2 district in the downtown and more specific neighborhood. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, in their publication, Regulating New Construction in Historic Districts, recognizes and advises that the zoning in a district plays a huge role in determining design aspects of a project and must be acknowledged by the review entity as it influences the economics of a project. The bank has met all of the general special permit criteria, addressed all site plan review requirements, and respectfully met the requirement of the DoD. I have provided to this board an updated narrative of those criteria and how the bank meets the criteria. The bank has shown that the proposal will not have an added impact on the neighborhood from a traffic or parking point of view. Our expert has provided that no changes will occur in traffic in the neighborhood, given no changes to the existing ingress and egress to the property. The bank has shown that there will be no greater impact on public services. The bank has shown that it meets all of the dimensional and use requirements of the ordinance. Additionally, and importantly, the bank's proposed addition has been designed with the sensitivity that it is desired and expected of contemporary buildings built in historic contexts when referring to the documentation like regulating new construction in historic districts by the National Trust. That context being the entirety of the neighborhood or setting and the related district, not just a few houses. Projects shown as being appropriate within their context utilize the same strategies and use similar design approach and elements, and are therefore considered model approaches to build in these sensitive areas according to the National Trust. The bank believes this project will act as a similarly appropriate model for future buildings being developed within the DoD. Based upon that, the board can find that the proposed addition is consistent with the special permit criteria of the DoD, in that the proposed addition does not disrupt the essential form and integrity of the subject historic building, structure, or architectural features, the lot where it is located, or its setting within the DoD. And we're happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hold off on questions right now. We will have public comment, and then we will have comments from the planning board, and then return to the applicant for discussion of all of those comments. Before we go to public comment, I'd like Director Report to make a statement about the Historical Commission report.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to clarify, there were some comments made about the Historical Commission meeting and what their thoughts were on the project. It's my understanding the Historic Commission is going to be discussing the report and their findings at their meeting next week. So the planning board may be interested in hearing the follow-up from that before determining where the Historic Commission stands on this particular matter. So you may find a report from the commission, Friday or the following Monday.
So just to clarify, effectively, they will be revisiting the report that they submitted for tonight, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Madam
All
Chair.
right. Yes.
The bank has no knowledge of this. Nobody's reached out to the bank. Nobody's asked us to attend the meeting. And if we have a matter on the Historic Commission agenda, we should know about it.
That's not for the planning board to deal with. You can deal with that with Director Port and the chair of the Historical Commission after this meeting's over. Now we're going to go to public comments. I would like to inform everybody that planning board members have had access to all written comments that were submitted and received as of yesterday and have been posted on the website. So when you speak tonight, would you please limit your comments to what you've heard and seen presented so far tonight relating to the application and the design. And as I always ask, if you can be specific, that would be really helpful to us, giving examples of what you like or you don't like and what might alleviate your concerns. Specifically, it is not relevant to speak about the role of the applicant in the community. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and Director Port will recognize you. Give your name, your address, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. And Rick Tainter will be keeping track of time for us. So I turn it over to Director Port to recognize speakers.
Okay, first person we have is Tim Wacker. And just a note for everybody, including Tim, you'll have to unmute yourselves on your end as well.
I've done so. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this matter again. I'll be speaking on behalf of myself and my wife, so I'd like to take the entirety of the 4 minutes, although I don't think I will need them all. I would like to immediately address Ms. Mead's remarks, concluding remarks, and coming back to the same thing that I raised last time, it's traffic. She said somehow or another she's demonstrated to the board that there will be no traffic impact. Yet in the study that I read, and it was not a study, it was basically some statistics yanked from a civil engineering standard, which explained how many cars would be added to the egress onto Prospect. How is that not having an impact? If I read that study correctly, and it's possible that I didn't, but I understood that there's an estimated 100 cars that are going to be leaving the area onto Prospect. All of those cars are going to be taking the most expeditious route to State Street, and that's going to be turning right onto Otis and then right onto Garden and then left onto State. What's the difference between doing that and just exiting straight onto State from the parking lot, as I believe it was Ms. Sontag had requested of the applicant at the last meeting, and which now through some unexplained recommendation from the fire department or the fire chief, that's not a good idea. I'd like to hear a little more detail as to why that's not a good idea, because again, these cars are going to be going up Otis, they're going to be going onto Garden, and they're going to be going back out onto State. It's a difference of a couple of feet. So please, take this traffic thing seriously. The study that I read, which was an addendum to the application that I saw, I don't know if there's another study out there. If there is, and I apologize, but from what I saw, that was not a study. It was a statistic that just showed what would be the expected traffic from this particular location. Next, you look at the plans that you presented here tonight. There is ample room to put this building right on State Street. You could just redesign it. The insistence on putting it where it's going, that's a burden on the community. It is going to be a detriment to our property values. And anybody there who says it isn't is just not being honest. It's going to hurt the value of our properties. We take pride in our properties. We take care of them very vigilantly. And the board has got to take greater consideration of that. And I would ask that you do that. And lastly, there are so many other things to say here. I really want to know why nobody has even mentioned from the applicant's side, why you're not looking at the numerous other locations where this could go with considerable less detriment to the surrounding community. And there's just silence on that. And that's not fair. We went to a lot of work I don't enjoy coming to these meetings and talking. Please, someone there explain to me why you can't put this somewhere else. And lastly, given the almost strong-arm techniques of the applicant in this particular circumstance, I get the feeling all you really want to do is just maximize the monetary value of this property, as opposed to installing something that is going to help the future growth of IFS. IFS has obviously been an exemplary member of this community. Why are you chucking that entire legacy just for the sake of this one particular application? This whole thing adds up to being absolutely inexplicable. And well, thank you. And thanks to the board for giving us all this opportunity to speak. That's all I have to say. Hello?
Thank you.
Oh,
Next person we have is Thomas Hopp.
Yes, hi, Thomas Hopp, 2 Open Street. I just wanted to say I support what the bank's plan is. I think that the new revised plan looks like it fits the neighborhood much better than the original. And I think that the bank has complied and listened to the neighborhood and listened to the planning board. And I think that I support what the bank is proposing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person we have is Peter Mackin.
Yes, Peter Mackin, 13 Prospect. First of all, just before I start, I'd like to say that Lisa Mead's 7-slide presentation of the Historic Commission meeting was pretty heavy in selected editing and one-sided and out of context. Just listen to the tape. We oppose this project for its height. It's higher than the 1860s building. Its mass and size, it's bigger. Its footprint, this is one big, gigantic building, not 5 roofs that says it's 5 buildings. There's no setback because of an unusable, in the words of IFS, unusable internal hallway. It creates a tunnel effect on Prospect with 0 setback versus 40 to 50 setback for the historic building. And all of this is being done for an additional 7 people and a museum that won't be convenient to the customers of 14 of their 15 current locations. Worst of all, if approved, it's going to have a permanent impact on our community and it won't be able to be undone. It'll totally destroy the historic nature of our neighborhood. It turns Prospect and Otis into 2 ugly alleys in our city. And finally, I'd just like to close and ask, because each of these proposals have been bigger, higher, larger, less setback than the previous one. How many chances does IFS get to resubmit plans without making the structure smaller or moving it to another location as directed, asked by the various committees and the neighbors? Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have is Glenn Richards.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Chair Sontag, can I ask your indulgence? I've carefully trimmed my remarks to really focus on just 2 things for the sake of time, but I don't think they'll fit into 2 minutes. Could you allow me just a bit more time to respond to some of the comments that have been made?
Yes, if you stick to the most relevant elements. Please.
Yes, I will do that. And by way of partial additional justification, part of it is actually including comments from Vice Chair Pecknick. All right, so I'll get right to it. First of all, I want to remind folks once more that the role of the Historical Commission, we characterize as there were some for, some against. We don't take a position for or against any project. We evaluate each project against the Secretary's standards, right? Now, we're here in the first place because of the DOD, and the DOD ordinance is here because people cite the various procedures, but it begins with, quote, "The architectural, cultural, economic, political, and social history of the city of Newburyport is one of its most valued and important assets," close quote. And then, quote, the preservation, rehabilitation, and enhancement of the city's historic city's historic downtown is critical to the preservation of the city's heritage and land values, its recently state-approved cultural district, and otherwise to benefit the general welfare of its citizens and property owners. So we meaning the NHC, does not get into what I refer to as, economic arguments, whether it's good for business or not. But you have to realize there is definitely an economic consequence, plus or minus, to preservation or lack of it. Visitors come to Newburyport and residents move here because it's beautiful, quote unquote, charming, and so on. It has a sense of place that's worth saving. So just wanted to remind you of that. And also that the NHC's role and the way it plays out its role is comparing projects as to whether or not they adhere to the Secretary's standards, not the Preservation Trust or the National Trust. That is a non-governmental, nonprofit organization, not referenced in any ordinance, totally irrelevant to any project before us or your board. So all the arguments that focus on that are really moot. And in fact, when even Ms. Mead didn't mention it, but when Ms. Pegnick analyzed it according to that fresh standard, she came up with a different conclusion. But anyway, so like I said, we don't agree or disagree with, or approve or disapprove any project. That's to you guys. But I also add that when an applicant, I don't mind if an applicant disagrees with our assessment, because, this is not an exact science, whether something agrees with the standard or not. But when they do disagree, they should provide some facts and evidence to support their opinion, and not just, launch an ad hominem or some kind of attack, or, say something is wrong, like in Mr. Jones's email to me. He says I'm wrong, but he never says why. Anyway, so I'm just going to try to stick to 2 points, Chair, to kind of keep this short. The first one, the first is about selectivity and bias and so on. I was accused of being selective. Ms. Mead said that he, meaning me, the chair, quote, limited his comparisons to the 2 smallest structures in the neighborhood. Well, first of all, that's verifiably false, because my report, or the report, does not exclude other structures, which you can clearly see if you look at the illustration. They're from the submitted plans from the applicant, and they include other structures. I merely, added some structures which were being kind of ignored or omitted, like 9 Prospect in particular. So perhaps the real issue is that the applicant is trying to focus as little attention on those 2 properties, 9 Prospect and the other one, Mr. Griffin's, as possible, and has, omits them from many of the comparisons. So there's an exception, like page 10 of what you saw tonight about the eave height mentions 9 Prospect Street, they say is 16.5 feet and an eave height of 9 foot, but they compare that to the little awning rather than the 25-foot eave height across the street. You'll notice on page 12, however, they talk about, I forget what it was now. I think it was, page 12, depth. They ignore 9 Prospect altogether. So I think it's entirely reasonable for an independent body like the NHC, the Historical Commission, which has no motive or interest to provide a bias. It's up, there's no problem, I think, for us to ensure that data isn't excluded or glossed over just because it might be unfavorable to the application. I should add that several members, in fact, of the NHC expressed a bias in favor of this applicant, because of their record of community service. Anyway, so that's point 1. The other one I'll address, and it shows up both in the presentation given tonight and in Ms. Mead's memo that was part of the package. It was on page 6 of tonight's presentation, and that's a very misleading mischaracterization of remarks made by a member of the board. Now, in the memo, it's on the top of page 7. She says that in an NHC meeting, this refers to the one of the 22nd, I believe, quote, a commissioner acknowledging the difficulty in applying the standards recommended the project be reviewed under some guidance for new construction in historic districts. In response to that suggestion, we have done so below. And she's referring there to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, FRESH, F-R-E-S-H, system, which, as I pointed out, is really, well, you'll see how it came into Ms. Pecknick's remarks, but it really is not part of what we are legally obligated to review. And on page 6 of the presentation tonight, she again refers to the recording. You saw this, all the slides with the times and everything, and how at 1 hour, 4 minutes, 50 seconds, Ms. Pecknick says that, quote, Department of Interior continually emphasizes the need to protect the historic setting, context of the property, the building site, and environment and other surrounding historic buildings. Well, that's perfectly correct. It jumps forward a little bit, and where she says, Ms. Pecknick emphasizes, now that's her word, Ms. Mead's word, not Ms. Pecknick's word, emphasizes, quote, speaking just as myself, then there's a ellipsis, all caps, not for entire commission. Now that you got to catch the close quote there. Ms. Pecknick did not say not for the entire commission, and I'm going to show you exactly in a minute what she did say. So, and she goes on to, say some other things, which I'm going to kind of abbreviate. But just to show you how off the mark that characterization and how much of a misquote that is, I'm going to let you hear it for yourself.
Speaking just as myself, without having read any of that, do I love Joe Morgan's idea about how to make the design of the addition fit in better? And do I respect all the work that these architects put into the design? I very much do. I think that these architects are very impressive. I think the design seeks to put the structure into conversation with the residential buildings by trying to break up the massing and incorporating these design elements from the historic houses. I love the wooden painted doors. I don't love everything. I don't like the one-story structure on the corner of Otis and Prospect. I don't like the height of the structure next to Mark Griffin's house. But what I like or not like is not important, because after reading all the bulletins and guidelines from the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service and the DOD ordinance about additions to historic buildings in historic neighborhoods and applying it to this project, then as a member of this commission, I can do no other than conclude that this project has too much height and too much volume to be shoehorned into the historic neighborhood context. Whether it needs to be scaled back, brought down, pulled in, put under, I don't know the solution. People have worked very hard on it. People have fought really hard against it. But there's an ordinance that requires compliance with preservation zoning laws, and this commission is required to advise the planning board based on that criteria. Under that criteria, this plan is too grandiose for this setting and will have a negative impact on other historic assets in the neighborhood. Finally, I did also look to the National Trust for Historic Preservation's explication of the Secretary's standards as they apply to new construction in historic districts and to additions. Specifically, the section on how to determine compatibility for new construction in a relatively visually consistent historic district. That's how specific their publication is. And I find it helpful to go through this 5-step process that they call by its acronym FRESH. But what I like or not like is not important, because.
So did anyone hear her acknowledge any difficulty in applying the standards? Because I did not. And did you hear her recommend that the project be reviewed under the FRESH system instead? No, we did not hear that. And you also heard the context of her comment, speaking just for myself. She was referring to speaking as if she hadn't read the standards and need to worry about that, but just her own personal opinion. So, and then you heard quite clearly her assessment as to whether or not the project met the Secretary's standards and how it's in complete 100% perfect agreement with what's in the report. So anyway, I hope these facts speak for themselves, even though they sometimes need a little help. You, that is the planning board, you can draw your own conclusions as to who's presenting a more accurate or fair comparison between the project and the standards as required by the ordinance. Whether it's the applicant or the historical commission, which is a board of dedicated citizens who just volunteer their time and effort to help protect the historic character and values of the city they love. So, Mr. Jones concluded in his interesting emails, he said, this is a sad day for the commission as well as the city. Well, I would agree that it's a sad day for the city, and thanks for giving me the time.
Thank you. Next person is Tom Coulterjohn.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Coulterjohn, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. The proposal before you by the institution does not meet the DOD criteria. At least 3 or more of the DOD criteria are not met. It does impair the integrity or character of the district or adjoining districts. It is detrimental to the character of the neighborhood. This proposal is not in harmony with the purpose and intent of the DOD. You have heard from countless abutters, neighbors, and others within the city. No proposal set before you has taken into account the overall neighborhood concerns about the size of this project. It has only gotten larger. This is a massive project, and the neighbors deserve relief and a resolution of their concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Brian Zimpel.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Zampel. I'm a resident at 3 William Griffin Way. I also operate several commercial buildings here in the industrial park. I'm speaking in favor of this latest design. I've followed this process all along. In the earlier revisions, I think the planning board did a nice job making suggestions and tweaking a very nice brick design that harkened back to our mill heritage. I'm not as up on all the different codes and the DOD things and everything else, but if you just kind of stand right where the bank is currently located, right within distance there, you do see, part of that heritage. You see, a 4-story mill building. And then as you walk down the street very quickly, you can see, a 7-story residential building. And, I think when you're looking at how this settles into the area, what it does for the area, and now you look at this next evolution of the design, it's obviously something that's designed to act as an architectural transition from our brick downtown to our colonial heritage in the South End and everywhere else. I think it does a nice job of that. I think it's very reasonable for what we have for our code, for what we have for regulations, and what we're trying to achieve as a city. So I ask the board to please approve this design for both the good of the bank, the good of the town, the good of our downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Nancy Caswell. Nancy, you'll need to unmute yourself on your end as well.
It's actually Jeff Caswell, not Nancy. She's
okay. Sorry, it comes up as
in a
Nancy.
process. I'm actually in favor of what the bank has done. I feel as though they've listened to all the abutters. This is the 3rd rendition. They have a right to build on their property. I actually own 7080 State Street, historic building right on State Street. I actually own a commercial building on State Street. It's a commercial building. They have to produce commerce here. I understand the neighbors' concerns, but I feel as though that they've actually changed the whole design to look very residential, and it's very fitting for the community. It feels as though these people don't want anything at all in the parking lot, and I'm very much in favor of this, and I hope you approve it. Thank you.
Mr. Caswell, could you please give us your address?
I own 7080 State. I live in 3 Jefferson Court, Newburyport.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Aaron Clausen.
Thanks. This is Aaron Clausen, 3 Otis Place. First, I just want to thank the planning board for the time and thoughtful approach to this project and running an open, transparent process, given the challenges of the pandemic. It's been a challenging thing to do, so I appreciate that. There have been a number of iterations of this project following on the original proposal to construct a large addition to an addition of the historic building. I think these changes attempt to address the concerns raised by both the planning board and the historic commission. They focus on building material, fenestration, and differentiation in the building volumes and creating parking. Though these issues have been a concern throughout the process, They do not effectively address the central issue and concern that I think most of the neighbors have had, which is the project is too big, and it's always been too big given its context and given the requirements of the DoD. The proposed addition is objectively bigger in scale to any building in the neighborhood, including the historic building it's being ascribed to, and substantially so. I think it's important to note that building scale should be considered in the context of its total volume. Height should not be the controlling metric, even though a building may share similar heights to some adjacent buildings. Its form, its placement on the site, its total floor area taken together should be what's considered in the scale and should be consistent with the scale of the neighborhood. And that's not the case with this project. To date, the changes have focused on an effort to reference the neighborhood in context and attempt to minimize how big the building feels on the street without actually reducing the size of the building. By creating multiple volumes, the project seeks to reduce or to read as multiple buildings in an attempt to disguise the size of it. And I think it's unsuccessful in doing so, even in this latest iteration. These efforts, along with the parking system, have actually made the project bigger, as has been stated earlier. And I think will seem massive as experienced as pedestrian on the street. I just referenced the Historic Commission supplemental report. So if I could just reference this supplemental report, I think it does a much better job at articulating this issue, and would request that the planning board require a plan with reduced size or deny the project as it's currently proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Ginny Donahue.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'm Jenny Donahue, 18 Cherry Street, Newburyport. I am chair of the Newburyport Commission on Disabilities, and that is actually why I'm here tonight. There was some comment about the bank adding some additional handicap spaces, which of course, we're always happy when that's being complied with. But something that hasn't been spoken to, and I think it's really important to raise this aspect of the project for everyone to understand the gravity of it. There's been a lot of talk about the aesthetics and the historical aesthetics and the outside of the building, but in the end, this project is going to result in an establishment that has historically not been accessible to become accessible, not only to its patrons, but to staff and employees as well, which is also going to widen the pool for employment of people with disabilities. Currently, the bank is not accessible for their employees or their customers, and this plan may include other aspects that people don't agree with. However, this could go on and on and on and on. And frankly, the whole feel that I've been listening to and witnessing from abutters and opposers is that there's really not ever going to be something that they're happy with and they're going to agree to. I understand not wanting the development in your backyard. I live in a residential neighborhood that's been developed heavily in my very backyard and beyond my fence line. And, those developers do what they're supposed to do. They follow the law and they get to do what they are supposed to do on their properties. And I just don't see why it's any different with this bank. However, I really do need to stress the importance of any opportunity for a historical building such as the Institution for Savings at 92 State Street to become accessible is not something that is typical. Most of the buildings downtown cannot be converted to become accessible. They cannot make accessibility an option for their customers or their staff. And this is something that shouldn't be overlooked just because, oh, well, it might serve a small amount of people. Well, that's just wrong because it actually serves quite a few people. We applaud them for the work they've done, for the dedication that they've put into it all. And we just want it on record 100% that the Newburyport Commission on Disabilities supports the project by the bank. And we really urge you to accept their proposal and allow them to move forward and allow progress to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Mary Ann Clancy.
Yes, hi, Mary Ann Clancy, 16 Neptune Street, Newburyport. Lifelong resident, work here. I am the marketing and communications director for the Institution for Savings, just to get that right out. And I urge you to support the project. As you would guess, running communications, I've been privy to this project from the outset. I saw the first set of plans. I was privy to our COO going across the street to the public library to try to present those plans to a neighborhood meeting, and then actually excluded from that meeting. I attended a neighborhood meeting, which we were invited to the following week. We were able to submit some plans. We heard lots of feedback. We took that feedback back to the bank and revised the plans. I attended a meeting with members of the bank, the architectural team, and members of the planning board and the historic commission at City Hall the following week, where we talked extensively about the plans. You were able to give us some great feedback. We hired a new architect. We revised those plans. We went back to another hearing. We got some more feedback, specifically to put the parking off the street and on the site, which we did with by the new lift system. We were told that we would like some maybe some more brick or some brownstone to match the historic building. The architect did that. We were then told that that brick and brownstone didn't fit into the neighborhood, so the architect went back and put in clapboard. What I'm saying is that 5 different times we were given instructions and recommendations and never hesitated for a moment to go back to the drawing board and do the things that the planning board and the historical commission and the neighbors asked us to do. I would submit 2 things. One is that I don't think there's anything that we can do that will make the neighbors happy. I don't think that they want anything on the lot. And I think that no matter how many times they give us suggestions and we go back to the drawing board, we're never going to make them happy. I was mayor once, so I know you. I know many of you on the planning board. I know how hard you work at what you're doing. And I know that even though you're required to follow the statute and do what's allowed by law, there's a part of you that wants to make everybody happy. I totally get that. But there are some times where you have to do the right thing and follow the statute. Sometimes you can't make everybody happy. And I will say one last comment, and that is that the neighbors are your constituents, but so isn't the Institution for Savings. We have been on that property for 175 years. We've been in this community for 200 years. We own another property on Story Avenue. We are taxpayers. We do everything we can to make our building beautiful inside and out. And we would ask the same consideration that you are giving the neighbors right now. We would ask that you give that same consideration to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Dave Tibbetts.
Unmute. Sorry about that. Actually, I had some brilliant things to say, I thought. This is Dave Tibbetts. I live at 26 Titcomb Street in Newburyport. Moved to Newburyport back in '74, way before it was trendy. And happy to have supported this woman named Mary Ann Bresnahan when she ran for mayor and ran for school committee, because she ended up being Mary Ann Clancy, our senior VP for communications, and outstanding, and just said everything that I would have said or could have said about what the bank has done to try to be responsive to the planning board, to the historic commission, to the rational neighbors, to the CEO, the COO, and our architectural team. I think have bent over backwards, have jumped through hoops, and I just heard the bell ring. So I will end. Thank you, planning board. I know you have a tough job, and I appreciate the efforts that you put into what you do.
Thank you. Next person is Colleen Turner.
Thank you. Colleen Turner Sacchino, 15 Otis Place. First, regarding the Historical Commission report, I find it concerning, actually troubling, that the first 2 advisory reports from them prepared and presented similarly, with Chairman Richards taking all the members' observations and opinions into consideration, were acceptable, but this most recent and, well, sharply written report incurred the bank's wrath. Abutters, neighbors, and supporters have never said, don't build. We have repeatedly stated and quite frankly begged that the bank adjust the proposed plan's inappropriate size. They may not like what they're hearing, but every single iteration of their proposed 16,000 square foot site plan abutting Otis, Prospect, and Garden has not only maintained an excessive footprint, but each version has actually grown larger and more looming. This is not listening to the feedback of this board, of the Historical Commission, or of neighbors and abutters. Moreover, changing the facade from brick to clapboard and creating a mishmash of buildings still hasn't changed the excessive mass, scale, and height. I request respectfully, please vote no on these special permits and urge that the bank take a step back and create a true compromise, because I'm pretty sure their team could accomplish this, meet their needs, and be appreciated and accepted by abutters and neighbors. Thank you very much.
Next person is Paula Renda.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Paula Renda. I live at 16 Otis Place. I'd like to piggyback on what Tim Wacker said earlier about being concerned about the traffic flow. If we were to have additional cars traveling on Otis and Garden, it would be a dangerous situation. As it is so far, when you you attempt to drive down Otis or Garden, cars parked on both sides, and you meet a car coming in the opposite direction. You either have to pull into a driveway, which is rare in that area. You have to back up several feet, find a place to go, and it takes a good 5 minutes. So to add traffic to that would be a dangerous situation. Secondly, the 1976 referral was 44 years ago. This is a different issue. It has to do with prosperity. Since then, I think we've realized that protecting the historic integrity of a city is key to a prosperous city. And fortunately, that's what Newburyport has enjoyed. So, and the third thing I'd like to mention is the illustrations are beautiful, the three-dimensional, and thank you for adding the cars. There are, most of the time, many more cars than that on the street, and there are no telephone poles or the incredible web of wires that join them. So it looks like a nice, pretty picture, but our neighborhood is so congested. I thank you for the time to let me speak.
Next person is Maureen Condon.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Freeman Condon and I live at 6 Forest Road in Salisbury. It is of great significance that this project needs no zoning relief. It requires no variances. We conform to parking requirements, setbacks, and height limitations. The massing and height that some have objected to are allowed by right within this zone. I urge you not to let personal feelings cloud your judgment. If you are unhappy with present zoning parameters for this location, endeavor to change them in the future. For now, please take to heart your responsibility to act in the best interest of all the collective citizens of the city. As a municipal official, I raise my right hand and pledge to always follow the law and to support the citizens' rights allowed by statute, even if I disagreed with them. I would ask you to do the same. Thank you.
Next person is Mark Griffin.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. First off, I would like to thank some of the people who spoke on behalf of the bank. David Tibbetts, who I respect and like, and as a trustee of the bank, and also Freeman Condon, who is also a trustee of the bank. I respect and like him as well. Brian Zampel, a corporator of the bank. I don't really know him, although I was a corporator myself, and until the bank decided to build this addition next door to my house. And Jeff Caswell, who's also a corporator of the bank. I just felt it, the need to also thank them and also identify them because they didn't identify themselves as trustees and corporators. I want to thank the planning board again for reviewing this application, but I also am very confused why this plan has not been changed significantly since the last hearing. Fundamentally, when we go from hearing to hearing, we feel like we're progressing incrementally towards a conclusion. So is tonight to be the vote? Is tonight to be the conclusion? Because I see very little change on these plans from the last hearing. I heard at least 3 board members at the last hearing who had concerns about the size. And then when I saw the historical report, it echoed those planning board members' concerns. I submitted a rather lengthy written submission about why this project doesn't comply, and I supported many of my conclusions with the historical advisory report. Why it does not comply with the DOD requirements, and also why it does not comply with the application for site plan review requirements. So I would encourage the planning board to try to get this thing to a conclusion. I honestly don't see the utility of this meeting where this plan has not been changed fundamentally. Basically, it seems like the applicant is saying, yeah, we heard what you said to us at the last meeting, but you know what? You're wrong. We comply. So give it to us. So that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Steve Charette.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Planning Board members. My name is Steve Charette. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my wife, Renee. We live at 16 Prospect Street at the corner of Prospect and Otis. We are direct abutters, 45 feet from the proposed project. I won't reiterate everything that the neighbors have said. They've done an eloquent job of really describing our collective view. And from our perspective, the design of the project aesthetically has improved. From our vantage point, we've had some eye relief with the lower roof. I heard some comments stating that one person stated they didn't like the lower roof on the corner. We like the lower roof on the corner. Our biggest issue continues to be the size and scale and how it looms over other properties. It is not subordinate to the original 1820 building. It creates a tunnel effect on Prospect Street, and it's just too large in volume. And I'm quite frankly, I'm a little insulted by hearing insinuations that, you know, the neighbors just don't want anything to be built. I haven't heard one of my neighbors ever state, going all the way back to February, that we don't want anything built. The Historical Commission, several planning board members, and all the neighbors have all stated the same thing. So everyone's in agreement that the size is just too big. So we would urge the planning board to either require the bank to make the project smaller or deny the project as applied for. Thank you very much.
Next person is Sean Sullivan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and planning board members for the opportunity to speak. My name is Sean Sullivan. I live at 9 Prospect Street, the small yellow house, a direct abutter across the street from the bank, with my wife Jennifer and my daughter Elle. By now, you may be as tired of hearing from me as I am of saying this, but I'm opposed to this development of this parking garage in regards to the size, the scale, and the mass of this proposal. The parking garage is too big and it dwarfs my house. The proposed structure totally changes the quality of life inside my house and losing the sun. You know, Lisa Mead's scale was completely wrong earlier, as Glenn Richard kind of pointed out. It's just another example of the bank distorting the view. I don't know how 25 feet and 16 feet are at the same scale. They're simply not. And it's just, this is a continuation of the bank trying to give a new aesthetic or a new design to give the appearance of accommodation without actually addressing our comments on size, scale, and mass. And now it's a little bit disturbing at this date that now it's turning a different corner where a bunch of people are jumping on board saying we're not you know, willing to listen to other things, and that we're never going to be happy with anything that's proposed. And that's simply not the case. We've asked it to be smaller or pushed back further. You know, Chair Sontag, you've asked repeatedly, what would we accept? And we would accept something smaller, like the size of my house, 16 feet, or push back a little bit. But the bank has never addressed any of that. You know, and now it's gone so far as you know, the historical committee put so much time and effort into putting their review before the planning board, and the bank is essentially calling it fake news, like misquoting it and just saying that it's not correct, when that wasn't even the purpose of the historical commission's efforts. So again, at the end of the day, I can't make you have them listen to us, but I will ask you to reject our plans when they don't. People on the board have said this size and scale is too big. The historical commission said it, we've said it, it's very easy to see, and yet still nothing happens, nothing gets addressed in that area. Thank you for your time, your consideration, and above all, your patience in this matter. Thank you.
Next person is Jack Santos.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, Jack Santos, 10 Spring Street, former resident of Otis Place. I've been following this closely from the beginning. Size, scale, and mass. My gosh, since February, that's all I've been hearing at every meeting. I second Steve Sherratt's and Sean Sullivan's comment. Neighbors want, of course, they want something other than a parking lot. I've never heard build nothing, not in these meetings, not in public or private conversations. And the dialogue and collaboration between the bank and the neighbors has just not been there. Yeah, and mostly the bank hasn't sought out opinion from the neighbors except through this proxy method in the board. Even though this board in February explicitly directed that that kind of collaboration should take place. Now, I appreciate that Attorney Mead has split up the dimensions into separate parts based on the facade, but that doesn't hide the fact that it's one building. And just as you walk down Disney Main Street, different facades provide a pleasant experience, but we all recognize it's one building and one large mass. We even walk through it. So yeah, that's a little disingenuous, but I'm really here to support Glenn Richards and the Historical Commission report. The finding was clear and spot on. If you approve this proposal, the city is going to be hard pressed to win any subsequent litigation based on that expert advice from the commission. Thanks for letting me speak.
Next person is Claire, and I'm not going to try to mispronounce your name.
Okay, I can understand that. Claire Papanastasiou for Otis Place. As a direct abutter to the bank, I would like to reiterate that, well, number one, size remains an issue. That's been a constant throughout all these meetings since February. Size, yet it has yet to be addressed. And I'd also like to address some, misperceptions out there, just to follow up with some of my neighbors and Jack just mentioned as well. No one has ever said that the bank does not have the right to pursue growth. In fact, I'd like to see the bank succeed. That's where my money is, by the way. So I would like to see the bank succeed. No one has ever wished the bank any ill. It's how the bank has pursued this expansion. All along, we have said size. And so it's disheartening when you hear people say that, oh, we'll never be satisfied. We'll never be satisfied, when in fact, we've been talking pretty forcefully since February about what would work for us. So I would just like to underscore that size remains the issue. It would be wonderful if it would be addressed, because we wouldn't be here today. And I appreciate the time. And one more thing, actually, regarding accessibility. Size has nothing really to do with accessibility, handicap accessibility. It can be a smaller design, yet be very sensitive and accessible to all. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Next person is Anne Marie.
Come on, Anne. We're done. She's going to be on video. I love it. I think we're still on. Hey, everybody.
And I'm trying to make it so you can speak. Are you with us? Anne seems to have disappeared. Give it another moment there. We have Ben Savoy. Ben, you'll need to unmute yourself on your end as well. Ben, are you able to unmute yourself? I guess no success there with Ben.
Okay. It finally unmuted. I've been trying for the last minute. Sorry about that. Yeah, Ben Savoy. I live at 17 Prospect Street. I'm not going to add to what everyone else has been talking about, but one point about the added traffic is in the wintertime. Anybody who drives down Prospect Street, Otis Street, Garden Street, if there's a little bit of snow or a lot of snow, it is dangerous. And to add all of that extra traffic, good luck. It's going to be crazy. Sometimes we don't even have places to park ourselves, so we have to find different areas in town to try to park. I'll end it at that. Thank you.
Okay, Anne Marie, we're gonna try again. And are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for having me speak. I just believe the project is inconsistent with the objectives and ideals expressed in the purpose statement of the downtown overlay zoning district, which was recently adopted by the City Council. That is noted in the Historic Commission's report. The project is inconsistent with the Secretary Interior standards and is inconsistent with the DOD special permit criteria that guides the decision-making process. So I hope you take that into consideration for not just the neighborhood, but Newburyport. And I'm anxious to hear the report from the Historic Commission. Thank you.
Anne Marie, before you go, could you give us your full name and your address, please?
I'm sorry, Anne Marie Clausen. I live with my husband, Aaron, and our daughter, Sydney, 3 Otis Place, directly across from the parking lot.
Thank you. Chair, the only person we have with a raised hand is someone who's spoken before. Do you have any objection? We do have another raised hand here. Stephanie Nikotich.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I know it's already become another long night. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. I'm concerned about comments from the bank that there is no need for zoning relief or the admonitions to you to follow the law. So just to be clear for people other than you on the board, the DOD ordinance is part of our zoning law. Site plan review is local zoning regulation, recognizing that certain developments can, because of their nature, size, complexity, or other reasons of probable impact, adversely affect the stated purposes of zoning. The bank has asserted a number of times that the zoning ordinance does not include any transitional rules related to development from one district to the next. As one purpose of site plan review, the zoning ordinance calls for a smooth transition between commercial and residential areas to preserve the character of individual city neighborhoods. Most of the abutting houses are in fact in a residential zone. Abutters have consistently asked for a reduced building footprint with reasonable setbacks from their properties and streets. They have asked for a height reduction so that the addition does not loom over them. The bank has not addressed those requests. A board member noted at your last meeting that the addition's distance from the original building does not make it look less massive from the State Street view onto Prospect Street. Chris Fay of the Historical Commission likened it to a serpent swallowing the neighborhood and the historic bank building. Quotes not included in Attorney Mead's presentation on that meeting. I agree with them, and I hope that you will deny this proposal in its current form. Thank you.
Yeah, Gary Corellis.
Thank you. My name is Gary Corellis. I own properties at 15-17 and 19-21 Prospect Street, both buildings of which are across from the parking lot behind the Institution Bank. I'm a resident currently of California. I find it interesting that those who spoke in favor do not live in the neighborhood of the 3 streets surrounding the bank. Not only that, but the corporators, employees, and trustees, some of whom are paid by the bank, were vocal in favor of the bank's proposal. It has been suggested that the bank be given the same consideration that the neighbors are given. While the neighbors' safety concerns for the density of the area with increased traffic is of a serious nature, especially during the winter months of snow. How about the bank and its council considering living in the neighborhood with the excessive large project? How about considering size and scale as it affects the lives of tenants and owners in the area where they live, and consider noise, exhaust of more cars, loss of sun, and views? I suggest that the plan be rejected based on its current form. Thank you.
And Chair, the last person we have has spoken previously. I don't know if you're taking second rounds of comments or if,
Given the extensiveness of all the comments, I think we'll close it at this point if that's the only person who has their hand raised.
There's one last minute hand raised.
Fine.
Kathleen Ferreira.
Hi, this is Kathleen Ferreira. Thank you for taking me. I live at 31 Basin Street. I am a bank employee. I want to let you know that I have watched the proposals that the bank has submitted to the planning board. I am in favor of everything that they have submitted. I know there's concerns with traffic within the neighborhood. With this proposal, they're only adding 7 more employees. Currently, there's not enough parking for the employees that we have. And what's happening, and the employees are parking on the street if they need to. Some of them do purchase parking permits and park within the garage, but I don't feel that there will be an issue with traffic with this proposal. And I am in favor. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, that wraps it up, Chair.
Thank you. We'll close public comment for this evening. and bring it to the planning board for members' comments. I usually wait to the end to give my comments, but I'm going to reverse it tonight because I have something to say that I would expect members would want to comment on. And rather than do 2 rounds, I thought I'd put it out first, and then we'll hear from everybody else. So let me begin by saying I appreciate the bank's design changes and adaptations since their first proposal of an all-brick structure. It's true that architectural details can reduce the visual impact of a single structure to allow it to better fit in with the residential character of the neighborhood. That being said, the proposed addition is still a single structure, completely infilling a space that the neighbors have come to appreciate for the light, views of other buildings, and a sense of openness in a densely built area. Along all 3 abutting streets, the proposed structure presents a continuous facade to residential structures that consist of single and 2-family units, a mixture of architectural styles, and varying roof lines and pitches. While, quote, consistent, to use the applicant's word, with the height, massing, and scale of most of all those residential structures, the proposed structure still seems to, quote, loom, to use the neighbor's word, or over the neighborhood, and potentially creates a, quote, tunnel effect on abutting streets. I would like to make a proposal. Would the applicant consider the following? Remove 1 level of parking, effectively 17 parking spaces, on the top level of the lift system. Lower the entire structure by whatever number of feet that would allow. Create a greater setback on Prospect Street side by removing the interior hallway. And find a way to soften, if not increase, setbacks on the Otis Place and Garden Street sides. Removing a level of parking would require reactivation of the Intermodal Transportation Improvement Fund, ITIF, special permit, which allows an applicant to meet their on-site parking requirement by paying into the fund and parking in a municipal lot or structure located within the downtown overlay district. This special permit would be combined with a DOD special permit with a special condition that would restrict parking in the State Street lot across from the library and Prince Place, but would allow parking in any municipal lot or structure located outside the 300-foot restriction now mandated by the ITIF special permit. That's my proposal, combines my comments, and I'll open it to planning board comments of your own or in response to what I proposed. And we will see afterward if the applicant will give it any consideration. Who would like to go first?
Am I unmuted, Bonnie? This is Ann.
Yes, you are, Ann.
Good. I think your proposal is very interesting and would really like to see what that might look like. I think from the very beginning, and that's 9 months ago, our board, the Historic Commission, clearly the neighborhood, has asked for something smaller. And for whatever reasons, the building has simply grown. I think it's insincere for the bank to say they've listened to their neighbors. I don't think that they have. The design has changed, the size has not changed. But here are my comments. First of all, when the Historic Commission gets together again next week, could they, and maybe this is even by a majority vote, I want the Historic Commission's opinion on whether this proposed project meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. That is the requirement under the DOD. They, I think, are the best entity within our city to give that opinion. And that's something I very much need for my ultimate vote on this project. So that's one comment. The second is, if the size of this project is not to be reduced, and it is indeed what has been presented to us tonight, I believe, and it's my opinion, that it can be denied, and I would vote that it be denied on the basis of both site plan review criteria and special permit review criteria. Now, the applicant's attorney has presented very strongly that this proposal meets all that criteria. Given the length of time we've spent on this project and its complexity, I wonder if the board, perhaps prior to our next meeting, would like to consult our own counsel with regard to opinion on denial under these standards. I think in this case, it might be important. And if we do deny it, I want to make sure our council supports the reasons that we might do that. And I guess my final comment is just one to the institution. And like everyone else in town, I have deposits in your bank and I think you're great. But from day one, everyone has just asked, please make it smaller. And you have not made it smaller. In fact, you're making it bigger. Your program is your program. I can't understand how adding 1,600 square feet and 7 employees is, well, let me not get into that. Just my disappointment that the bank has not listened, particularly to your neighbors. You are part of that neighborhood. They are part of yours. And it's an extreme disappointment. But again, I'd like the Historic Commission to answer that question. And I believe if the design doesn't change, we can deny it, and perhaps we should consult our counsel before that. And third, I do like your idea, Bonnie, because it would bring down the size, and it could address, I think, a lot.
Bonnie, I'll go ahead and make some comments. Just
Okay, this is Beth, right?
This is Beth. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you.
I am in agreement with Ann and Bonnie. I don't think that it is compatible with the size, scale, or height or character of the historic building, the lot, or its setting within the DoD. I appreciate what the architects have tried to do in breaking it up, but at the end of the day, it looks too massive. I believe that it's out of scale with the historic building and with the neighborhood. I was actually thinking about the parking, because I think the parking drives much of what the bank is saying restrains them. So I had also been thinking, we're basing it on the square footage, which I know is how we typically determine parking requirements. I was wondering if there's any way to grant some sort of relief if they're opening it up for 7 employees. Can we sort out how many parking spaces they actually need? Limit, how many people are going to be in the building permanently as full-time employees, and then go from there with meeting what parking they need, using some of the off-site parking that's available. I think that at the beginning, parking was a big issue because they needed exactly the number of the lot that was across the street, and people were concerned that they're basically using that lot to fill their needs and no one else would be able to use it. But I do think there needs to be some sort of compromise on the parking. Maybe they could do a below ground parking level and then have a 1-story building that, might meet their programmatic purposes. I think the bank needs to think outside the box a little, or beyond what, the ideal situation for them is with this large addition. Maybe think about using some of the space that they have differently. I do think the bank needs to reassess because I don't feel that it meets the criteria. And I think we can only grant it if we shall approve a DOD special permit only if we first determine that the proposed new construction meets all the requirements. So I don't feel that I would be able to say that it meets the requirements at this point. Just a minor point with the exit, I know that there was an email to the fire department and they said they didn't want to back out into State Street. Could we, think outside the box on that too? Maybe put up some sort of a chain where if the fire department needed to get in, they could, but traffic wouldn't typically go out onto Prospect Street. But that's just a minor point. I think there are bigger issues. So those are my thoughts.
Who else would like to speak from the planning board?
I will speak. This is Rick.
Yeah.
Well, one statement that I want to make that just want to get out there is a number of people have suggested in comments that the size of the building, the height and the setbacks and everything are all allowed as of right. And I really do think it has to be emphasized that if that were the case, we wouldn't be here. There's a downtown overlay district special permit, and the downtown overlay district was put into place, I have to think, because the city council recognized that the underlying zoning wasn't working and that it could have problems with new development next to existing historic development. So there are underlying standards, but the downtown overlay district does require us to assess whether a project is in the right place, is the right size, and so forth. I'm in some ways less concerned about the architectural style and more concerned about location of buildings and the scale and massing. I do feel that there were some statements made in the presentation that just were wrong. The idea that you can break a building into smaller, or call a building multiple smaller buildings just by where you put the roof line. I think that it doesn't work. And same thing with the facade. If you look at the facade on Prospect Street, there's a big deal made about a recess in the middle of the building that it seems to be less than a foot deep. Compare this to Merrimack Landing opposite the firehouse. There's a similar recess there, but it's far deeper, and yet you don't experience the mass of a building from the roof or from the second story. You experience it from the street. So I don't think that has done anything to break up the massing. It's unfortunate, I think, and I think that maybe Beth alluded to this, that what's happening here is that the parking is the leading element here is the factor that's pushing the scale of this entire project. And that really seems backwards. We should be looking at designing a project that fits into the neighborhood, and then figuring out after that how to address the parking. So I think that this project isn't beginning from the point of view of trying to fit into the neighborhood. It's beginning from the point of view of trying to get some additional space and maximize the parking to meet the zoning ordinance. I'm going to go back to something I've said in at least 2 previous meetings, and I seem to be alone in this, but I will say it again because I do feel strongly. I think this project is missing. This is a once in a lifetime, I think, opportunity to right a wrong that was made in the 60s or 70s when buildings were torn down on this site and a parking lot was created fronting on State Street and really creating this huge missing tooth along the State Street streetscape. And if, what we have right now is we've got a suburban parking lot and a sculpture that really, to me, doesn't fit in terms of scale. It's a kind of a postmodernist sculpture that doesn't have any historic character to it. Those 2 things could be easily replaced by a building that was similar in scale to previous buildings and to restore the historic context of the historic building. I'm not going to push that fight because obviously I'm not getting anywhere with it. But I do feel that pushing the commercial use into the neighborhood rather than putting it on the commercial street is a mistake and is going to cement in place, as I said, a mistake that was made perhaps 50 years ago. I think that Bonnie's idea about doing something with the parking, reducing the amount of parking that's required on site would be great. I think going along with that, trying to truly break up the massing of the buildings rather than just breaking it up by the roof lines and little tweaks in the facade would be better. And I really support Ann's suggestion about consulting counsel on the potential, how we deal with this if we don't feel that that the standards have been met. And I do feel also that it would be very helpful to have a true recommendation from the Historic Commission regarding whether this complies with the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Do we have any other board members who'd like to speak?
Yeah, MJ, if you don't want to go, I'm happy to go. Okay, plus you're on mute, but okay, thank you. I've got several points. The first is, and it actually started on the onset of Attorney Mead's comment with respect to the parking and why it can't be 2 stories down, because the fire department, fire marshal said that it's not allowed. And those were probably not the exact words. It is surely the bank's decision whether they want to have the program, the configuration as they see fit. And then it's this board's responsibility, as we've all said, to follow the ordinances to the letter, in my opinion, as long as the ordinance is clear and unambiguous. But back to the parking, I would, if the only reason the bank is not bringing it down to 2 levels, which would reduce the height, which I think is, at the end of the day, we can call it scale, we can call it mass, we can call it height. My sense is the biggest issue of that troika is the height. Then I think it's prudent and rational for the applicant and or the planning director to specifically request from the fire marshal the reasons why it cannot be 2 levels down. Is it actually a violation of NFPA? Is it a like to versus a must have? And again, those are only important if the bank would consider lowering it down. If they don't want to, then that's a moot point in that I think. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the ordinances. We know that there's site plan review, and we know with the DOD that the DOD has references to special permit. In my opinion, those are important and they are applicable to all special permits that we decide on. What I find interesting is the reference in the DOD. And first of all, with respect to the reference, I think the DOD is very clear on what are we to do with respect to making a decision. There's something in the DOD that talks about determinations. You can call them recitals, you can call them preambles, but in my opinion, they do not guide. They're not needed and should not be used for this planning board to make a decision. I think those decisions are called out in section 27-F, procedure and criteria. I found interesting with respect to that and there's a reason to go back in history that this DOD section has been revised. The first one was out there, and I'd like to just read this one sentence. It says, the SPGA, but in its sole, it says, as the case may be, shall consider, but in its sole discretion, need not adhere to any relevant provisions of the United States Secretary of the Interior, et cetera, et cetera. If we now go back to the revised, that this was now revised, and I find it very interesting. And it says, reviewing the application, et cetera, it says, as the case shall adhere to any reference. So before it need not, now it says shall adhere. So to me, it's a very clear, very unambiguous statement that we have to conform to these standards. So what I would ask as some of us have with respect to the Historic Commission, is if you would please provide as much specificity as reasonable to those sections there. Now, I will say it's my opinion, and that I think that the key on this is the neighborhood, not necessarily historic building. Again, I can appreciate others have a different opinion, but to me, when I've looked at the perspectives, when I've looked on the State Street, I do find a marked difference between historic structure and where this new addition will be. So I don't, at this particular point, subject to any other information provided by the Historic Commission, I do find that there is compatibility with the new addition and historic structure, it's not of a scale that diminishes or diminutive to the historic structure. However, the second part of it, which is very clear, again, in the standards, it talks about the neighborhood. And I also find interesting the word neighborhood. As somebody says, they had neighborhood just Prospect Street, Otis, or is it other areas? There's some streets that we know that have row houses, probably 2-3 blocks away, that are probably as large or very similar, at least in length, to what the bank is proposing. Is this something where you do a weighting factor that the streets around there is 60% and the rest of the neighborhood is 40%, or whatever one wants to do? So again, for my decision making, I think it would be helpful if there could be, if there's any guidance, if they care to provide any guidance with respect to what is defined as the neighborhood. The last thing, and to me, it's the elephant in the room. We talk about the height, we talk about scale, we talk about mass. It seems to me at the end of the day, the height is the biggest issue. Now, personally, when it comes to the mass or the size, that is the volume within there. If the height was lower, it doesn't bother me, and I think it's reasonable and consistent with the ordinance that if they want to have the rest of that area filled in, then I think that conforms to the ordinance. To me, the big question on the table is the height, as it's referenced in the DOD, and more specifically to the U.S. Department of Interior standards. I think I'll leave it at that for now, Bonnie. Thank you.
Okay. MJ, would you like to add anything?
I really think I don't have a lot more to add. I think I basically agree with Anne's evaluation that we should get some counsel, because I also think it's still too big. The whole thing's too big. It's been too big all along, and it hasn't really changed in size. I guess to me, it seems like it's obvious that if you reduce the building, then you reduce the parking. So your problem goes away somewhat just by eliminating the parking required if you're having less people in the building. So that's maybe part of it. And then I think in addition, I would just like to add that to me, the length of the building on Prospect Street is not well broken up. I think Rick mentioned this, less than a foot of an 8-foot section is pushed back. If you look across the street between the buildings, you'll see driveways. And that's a big difference than just a little section that's pushed back 1 foot. So I think the setback on Prospect Street to me is in addition to the height, probably the biggest problems that I see. The height next to on Otis Place, next to Attorney Griffin's house is appalling. To put something that large next to a building so small, I think that is not neighborly. I'll just say that. But I think everything else has been said already, so I'll stop there.
Okay, so we've heard, oh, Tanya, hello.
Yep. Hi, sorry. I know I'm the last one. I will say I agree wholeheartedly with the issue with the comments made on parking. I think that's been something I've actually been saying since February, that you know, this comment early on that the bank was going to take all the parking at the lots, and then the bank's response was to build a larger building with a lift system was an issue. But again, they traded sort of offering parking on site with a larger building. So if there's a compromise there, I think that's fine. I do think though that that we need to give the bank some conclusion on this to some degree. I don't know that that we should say, okay, fine. And would we be okay then if the bank comes back and lowers the height, and then all of a sudden now is there another issue? And I think that that's not fair to the bank. They are a property owner. They do have rights to build on their site, and they do adhere to our dimensional regulations for this district. So I think that we do need to come to some conclusion on that. As far as the Secretary of Interior Standards and the DoD, I think some of the DoD provisions that we're discussing, those are subjective review criteria. And I know that in my experience in working with planning boards, those are discretionary. So I think they're really hard sometimes, I think, for us to all maybe come to an agreement on whether they meet them. And so I think that, you know, we have to figure out sort of how are we gonna review this project, because they are subjective. I think that the bank has thought outside of the box. I think that they've come back to us with a lot of different plans. I personally think that this does fit into the neighborhood. I think it does help preserve the historic building in the front. I think building on State Street is going to be tough because that's a small building, and I don't know how you would build something on the corner without then overshadowing that historic building. So I think there's that too. I think that I have some more specific proposal, you know, things that on the building and the proposal as it is, but I just don't think that maybe it's appropriate to discuss that at this point until we sort of, I think, as a board decide to give them some direction, to give the bank some direction, and whether that's getting a historic commission report or whether, yeah, I guess I'm not really sure sort of what the next step would be, but that would be, those are my main comments.
Okay, thank you. Before we discuss among ourselves any direction that we want to give to the applicant, as Tanya has suggested, and I think others would also feel the same way, that we don't want to just keep going over and over things and throwing out ideas and we're done with that. We need to be much more directive. It is difficult in this setting and online, remotely, to have that kind of conversation, but I think we need to have it. And as I say, before we have that, let's go back to the applicant and see, at least for our comments, what their reaction is, and if that can give us some sense of the direction we would like to have them go. So Attorney Mead, would you like to direct this part of your applicant's conversation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess to say that I'm surprised at some of the members' comments and not at others would be an understatement. I feel like this is the first time that we've had this conversation, when 2 weeks ago, it seemed as though we had a very different conversation. So I am surprised at that. I would like to take the board back to February, and I think it's a nice segue from Tanya's comments. So we had originally and continue to have an ITIF special permit filing, but and we had resolved that in a number of different ways, but still using the ITIF special permit. And the neighborhood, both around Otis and Prospect and Garden, as well as Harris and State, were out really unhappy about the fact that there would be more cars parking in the area, notwithstanding the bank's commitment to, you know, buy spaces in the garage and use the waterfront parking lot and lease spaces from a local business. And so the bank said, okay, we hear you, and redesigned their project to be able to bring the parking on site. And now there's a suggestion being made, well, now let's move the parking off site again, and maybe actually even do something that the variance, that the ordinance doesn't even allow. So I'm surprised at that. I also want to point out that the neighborhood is not single and two family neighborhoods. There are 8 multifamily buildings between Prospect, Garden, and Otis Street. And I understand that we need to continue to have this conversation, but let's have it in the context of what exists in the neighborhood. 3 of those actually, only 2 of them, 1 and 5 and 7 Garden, have parking. None of the rest of them, including Mr. Corellis's units at 17 to 19, 15 to 17 and 19 and 21, have sufficient parking for 6 units each. None of them do. And so the bank doesn't create a parking problem in the neighborhood. The neighborhood is very much the south end and the downtown in Newburyport. Nobody has sufficient parking. Everybody parks on the street. Multifamily houses that have existed forever do not have sufficient parking, do not pay into the ITIF. There are 8 multifamily structures in this neighborhood, not just single and 2 family homes. And that's important to keep in mind, because that is the context of the neighborhood. And then finally, I just have to correct, and obviously the bank is going to need to think about a couple things, but 9 Prospect Street is directly across from the lowest entrance to the building. And that is directly across from the entryway, the porch area of the new building. It is not directly across from the 2 gable end structures. It's just not. And to suggest that it is otherwise is just not true. So we would like to hear what the board has to say, because they've said a lot of different things. And the bank has worked really hard to try to accommodate the parking, try to accommodate fitting in with the neighborhood. And we're now 9 months into this, and we're not even close to a consensus.
Why haven't you ever tried to make it smaller? It's a very simple question, and it goes back 9 months, and it goes back to the people in the neighborhood.
So there's a couple of things with regard to that. One, we were asked, it was clear from everybody at the first meeting not to have parking anywhere, take care of your parking. And the bank has programmatic needs. And so it needs a certain amount of square footage. And if you're going to have that square footage, you need to provide parking. And if you're not going to have the parking pursuant to the ITIF, you have to provide it on site. And so we've tried to reach that balance.
I think in terms of parking, my only concern was to not invade the library parking. And I don't believe we have enough information, when it's not our purview, to judge the space program, square foot program that the bank has come up with. Do I think the future financial viability of the Institution for Savings is dependent on a museum at that site? No, I do not. So has anyone tried to take that out of the program? Take maybe some other things out of the program? And just my question, why haven't you tried to make it smaller? And, you know, if you want to go forward for a final vote on this particular plan, thinking that, you know, you've listened to your neighbors, you've listened to the boards, then please go ahead.
And with all due respect, the bank's not asking to go forward for a vote. We've clearly heard what the members have had to say. And I've just asked to hear about how we find a consensus. It is not up to the board to determine what the business needs, nor the
I appreciate that. And that's why in my comments, I kept it to period standards, special permit, et cetera, et cetera.
The hyperbole with regards to the museum is overstated, please. So we tried to explain in the very beginning some of the reasons the bank was moving around their programmatic needs. And the bank has programmatic needs. It is a business. It has a by right use in the downtown. And quite frankly, all of those houses on between Otis and Garden are all non-conforming structures. You can't build a single or two-family house in the B2 district anymore since 1978 because the zoning says commercial. So the bank does not want to go forward with a vote. The bank is going to ask for continuance, obviously. But we've heard shorter, not as much volume, parking, not parking, building at the front of the site, not at the edges. You know, they've already spent tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars in design. And now you're asking them to do it again. And with all due respect to all the people around the neighborhood, they really don't want anything in that parking lot. And so we need to come up with something.
I think that, Attorney Mead, is an unfair statement. And I think a number of people in the neighborhood have corrected you on that. So I don't think that's fair to say.
Well,
Has the bank done focus groups with your architect and the neighbors, sketches, you know, before spending hundreds probably of thousands of dollars on design and consultants and all the rest? I think that's all we've asked.
Let's be clear. And I think that, you know, and I really don't want to get into this back and forth, but I do want to put it on the record again, because Mary Ann Clancy said it earlier. I got a plan from the bank. Mark Griffin and I work in the same building. I took the plan up to see Mr. Griffin. We had a short discussion and that was the end of it. Then the neighborhood started having meetings. We attempted to attend a meeting and were asked to leave. We then had to have a meeting that was moderated by a city councilor that really was nothing more than hearing us and then having people tell us why we weren't doing the right thing. Then we changed the parking. And then we redesigned the entire building after that. So it takes two to come to a conclusion where everybody's either happy or not happy. But you can't turn people away when they offer to try to sit down. So I'm asking the planning board for a little more direction here, understanding the bank needs to, wants to, has a right to add on and expand their business.
So let me try to summarize what the board members have said, and they can chime in if I don't get it quite right. I think the difference between the last meeting and this meeting and our comments is that tonight members were much clearer on their concerns. Their concerns about the addition meeting the standards of the Secretary of Interior, but also addressing the concerns of the neighbors around just one word, size. And as Don pointed out, it seemed to come down to height over and over again. That's where my proposal came from. We're looking at a compromise. We're saying we can offer you some relief with the parking based on the current programming needs and the requirement for parking according to the size of the structure you have, the working space that you have proposed. So we're trying to make it possible, given everything that we've heard over these months, for you to, for your applicant, your client to make some significant changes in their proposal. I believe that that's the direction that board members would be most comfortable in accepting a new design, a redesign, if you could reduce the height. And then, as someone else pointed out, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was on the board, that the design would come first and the parking would come second. And that we can work out something through the special permit process in a combination of the ITIF and the DOD to make the parking work and not be congested in the lots that are in the neighborhood. But first and foremost, we need to know from you or your client if you're willing, they are willing to consider and propose to us a reduced size proposed structure.
So I have, Madam Chair, I have two questions. One, if this building were 5 feet shorter, would that have an impact? And would that be acceptable? That's the first question. The second question is, while you think about that, is I don't believe, and respectfully, maybe you just review this with Mr. Port, and I haven't. I don't believe that what you're suggesting under the ITIF is actually within the ordinance, but it would require a variance from the ordinance, because the ITIF requires us to count the parking spaces in the municipal lot or have a lease with somebody within a certain area of our structure. It does not say that we can use a municipal lot that is outside of the DOD. That would require a variance.
Well, I did have that discussion with Director Port, and the combination of the two was, at that time anyway, what he believed would work. The variance would be a separate question to ask him, and it's a detail we probably don't need to work on right now.
Could I speak to that, Bonnie?
All right, if you want to.
Yeah, just briefly. I think the one point that I would agree with Attorney Mead on that is that it would require potentially a variance for the radius of 300 feet. But the assumption here, I think, based on the discussion you and I had, Bonnie, some time ago about this was, I think the assumption here is that based on the impact that this project may or may not be having on the neighborhood, if the building is reduced in size and the parking is reduced in the building to address that size or massing concern, then that need to do so could be taken to the zoning board of appeals if need be for a variance, given that the State Street and Prince Street lots are the ones that are within 300 feet right now.
So let me just clarify, if they were to propose a smaller building requiring less parking, that would be to their benefit in asking for a variance?
No, what I was suggesting was just that in the, to Attorney Mead's point, in the ITIF section of the parking ordinance, the parking section of the zoning ordinance, there's a requirement that that parking be within 300 feet. And so my reason for agreeing with Attorney Mead that a variance may be necessary is because of the radius that park, to put it in, say, the Green Street parking lot, pay into the fund, and then allow those spaces in the Green Street lot, but not as a condition of the special permit, I think is what you're suggesting, that they could not put those spaces or use spaces at all in the State Street lot, for instance, that they would potentially have to get a variance for the radius of 300 feet that the current ordinance allows, because it does not allow them to take credit for spaces beyond 300 feet right now. And that, I think what she was pointing to was just the fact that that's not a waiver that the planning board can grant.
I understand that, but you said a second piece in there that would improve their standing in requesting a variance from the zoning board, I thought you said. There was something that they could do about the size of the building and reduce their need for parking?
No, I wasn't, in that particular point, I wasn't speaking to the variance, but more just that obviously removing parking in the building would reduce the size and massing of the structure.
Two separate issues, got
Yeah.
it. So those are two options for the client to, for the institution for savings to consider in redesigning their proposed structure.
And so my question, Madam Chair, relative to the reduction in height of 5 feet?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
It's not that simple.
Yeah, I just don't think it's straightforward like that. It's still, I mean, you're not gonna just drop everything by 5 feet. I think your architect would be making some design changes to accommodate a lower structure. But overall, the height would be reduced. I just can't tell you by how much. The idea was to reduce a level of parking in there, which would automatically give you whatever that difference is to play with.
That's so, Madam Chair, that's the point. So that's my question. My question is, because the only way that we can drop the height is to reduce the parking. So my question is, if it dropped by 5 feet, which would take the eve line down to 20 feet, 24 feet.
Only 1 foot lower than where it is now?
No, so 20 feet, 20 feet.
Yeah. And then it drops the ridge line if the architect sticks with the same pitch and doesn't vary the pitch on any of the roofs, which might be another consideration.
Right, I can't redesign. I'm just trying.
No, I know. But you're asking me about reducing feet, so I'm just saying, as Ann says, it's not a simple, 5 feet lower. It's the whole structure and what it's gonna look like.
Yeah, I think you've got 3 audiences, unfortunately for you. One are your neighbors, and what would they find fit the character of their neighborhood? Secondly is the Historic Commission, and what do they think would meet the standards? And then third is the planning board, and we have separate responsibilities. So I can't just say chop off 5 feet and assume the neighbors will be happy and the commission will be happy. It's a lot more complicated than that.
So with all due respect, I have the zoning ordinance, the planning board, and the Historic Commission. And that I understand that you take public input, but my job is not to do exactly what the neighbors want. This is not a popularity contest. That's not how we get permits. That's not your role. And I understand that there are impacts that need to be understood and addressed. But the role from which the planning board is charged is an adjudicatory body to apply the ordinance. And so to your point, certainly because the DOD requires input from the Historic Commission and requires you to apply certain standards, you absolutely should do that. It doesn't include what does your neighbor say.
Let me just say this. The process is the product, and the most successful projects in my mind are done in cooperation with neighbors. I think it's a big mistake on your part not to reach out to the neighborhood on the next step. I don't know the history of the bank and the neighbors. I don't know the personalities, but I think it's been a big problem in moving this project forward. And yes, we do listen to public comment, and yes, neighborhood character, in my opinion, is in part related to how people who live in a neighborhood feel about a development project. And, you know, if you had one or two abutters opposing it, that'd be one thing. Even if you had one person who lived in the neighborhood that supported it. But no, it's a lot of people who are saying no.
Could we hear from any other planning board members? Any advice you have for the applicant at this point? Or anything you'd like to correct that's been said since you spoke last?
Bonnie, I just have, this is Tanya. I have
sure.
Just one thing, and again, I think this is really going to come down to, I guess, the rest of the board, or sort of whether the opinion is that the building's too big and it's not going to fly as it is. But I do think, and I've said this over and over again as well, that I would like to see some screening or some reduced or increased setback over on the property line. Is that Garden Street? I think I might have misspoke at the last meeting and said Prospect Street, but I know that there is some trees there that are mature and it blocks sort of that wall of building, and now there's just a walkway. And so I do think that if you're looking at a redesign, I think that would go a long way, especially would go a long way with the Griffins by maybe pulling that back a little bit if that can happen and you're able to reduce that. With Mark Griffin, sorry.
Okay, that's Otis Place. Just to clarify. Direction. I think you've heard that pretty much a good number of planning board members would like to see the height reduced and something to do with the size overall, as well as some of these other details. If you're not planning to do that, we'd like to know, and so would the Historical Commission, because maybe they should hold off on reviewing this design if you're going to come in with another one. I think I just contradicted myself, but you know what I mean.
Madam Chair, at this time, I think, as you can imagine, these are all very big decisions that can't be made immediately. So I'd like to request a continuance to December 2nd.
Do we meet on December 2nd? Is that our, sorry.
I think so.
Wednesday. Yes, you're right. December 2nd. Yes, December 2nd. Okay. And at that time, well, we would move ahead with, on our side, at least getting the final review and report of the Historical Commission on what they've seen so far. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that the bank has been given some pretty clear, well, not clear, but some clear feedback anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know that the Historic Commission needs to meet. That's certainly up to them. They can
Okay.
correct their report if they want it. That's up to them, but we'd like a continuance to December 2nd.
All right. Do any planning board members have anything to add to this discussion at this point? All right, I will take a motion to continue this hearing to December 2nd.
I make the motion, Vic.
Thank you, Rick. Second?
I'll second it. MJ.
Thank you, MJ. And I'll do a roll call. Oh, here they are. Alden,
Abstain?
Beth,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. So we'll see you on December 12th. 2nd, sorry, 2nd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Planning board members, stand up, turn around, sit down. We've still got some work to do. Minor site plan review for 0 Parker Street. This has been continued several times. Just as background, we accepted the application as complete on November 20th, a year ago. And voted a waiver of the narrative submittals with the exception of stormwater management and landscaping. Is there anything you'd like to say before the applicant speaks? Andy?
No, I think just briefly on this particular application, it's been kicked around for a while, but I think that to my knowledge, all the issues that have been raised for this particular application have been addressed. There's screening on the street side, and there is a stormwater management issue that's been addressed to the satisfaction of the city engineer and Phil Christensen, the consulting engineer that works for the board. So from my perspective, there's no reason not to approve the application before us.
Would you recommend that we read through very quickly the draft decision and the findings?
Yes.
You want to pull them up, please?
Bear with me one moment.
Sure.
Okay, sorry for that. Okay, hopefully you can all now see the Word document that I have up.
Yeah. If we need to be a little bit larger, maybe? Yeah. Okay, and the findings are just confirming things that we already know. For example, traffic, parking, and access. Fire department has reviewed the plans and they have no concerns. Everything so far. Stormwater consultant finds the site plan revisions will be adequate to direct the stormwater to the previously constructed stormwater management area. Okay, land use planning. Is there anything special in there? The applicant will install a new fence along Parker Street. And open space, the applicant has provided minor site grading adjustments so as to minimize minimize negative impacts surrounding wetlands. Okay, there are only standard conditions, I believe, no special conditions.
That's correct.
All right, then I believe are there any other comments that anyone would like to make on this?
My own suggestion was just that TJ Melvin, who's here for the applicant, if he wanted to just give a brief explanation of the application, just because I think this has been continued out for several months.
Oh, I thought you took care of all that.
Right,
If you
again,
have
but
anything extra he'd like to add, please do. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so my name is TJ Melvin. I'm with Millennium Engineering here on behalf of the applicant. So as Andy had mentioned, this has kind of been hanging out there for a while. I believe it was about 10 years ago.
Is there anything in addition to what to add? Whoops. You're coming and going. We're not really hearing you.
Well, I guess I'll finish up for TJ, and then like I said, the stormwater management issues have been addressed to our satisfaction.
Okay.
The city officials and the consulting engineer, and the screening is on the Parker Street side, which was the other concern that the office had. I don't know if TJ can offer anything else, but it just seemed a little odd to not have the applicant be able to speak to the application as it's been revised over the last couple of months.
Only if his technology will allow him to speak. Are you still there, TJ?
If he is, and maybe he's having a technical issue, but my presumption is that he still would like the board to act on it if approval is in order.
Yeah, I'm going to call for a motion. According to the draft motion in the staff report, if somebody wants to make that motion and read it into the record, I'll take the motion.
I will move to approve the minor site plan review application for 0 Parker Street in accordance with the draft decision provided by the Office for Planning and Development.
Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Who's that, Ann?
Yes.
Okay. And now I'll take roll call. Alden,
Abstain?
Beth,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. Thank you. 102, 104 High Street request for a minor modification under the DOD special permit. Andy, you wanted to speak to this, I believe, first. Andy, are you with us?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I had not unmuted myself. I just wanted to show the board members the aerial photograph of the property as it's shown in the city's MyMap program. The reason I point this out is just because there may be a coverage issue for this lot, or essentially an issue where this project as proposed to be changed from gravel to pavement may not meet the open space requirements of the ordinance. So there was a discussion that Caitlin and I had with Jennifer Blanchet, our zoning administrator. We think it might be necessary to go back and review whether or not it is tripping that threshold. My original concern with this application was just verifying that there was not going to be a stormwater management issue, because the request here, if you look at the aerial photograph, is there's a building obviously on the property, and there's multiple units in that structure. And then on the back, there is a gravel parking lot, and the original plans that I can pull up as well show that that area would be gravel. And I'll pull up a photograph of that, but the proposal is to change all of that into asphalt. And my original concern was that that would be a significant amount of coverage in the lot and might result in a sheet flow onto adjacent properties. The city engineer had taken a look at that, and I think might have expressed comfort with the landscaping plan that was provided to put some landscaping around the edge of the property, which I'll pull up as well. My primary concern was just that we don't, result in a pattern of approving a bunch of lots with the significant amounts of coverage without adequate, one, in terms of open space and plantings, but two, in terms of stormwater management. So, John Eric, the city engineer, has taken a look at this, but my original concern was whether or not we should have Phil take a look at it and whether or not this would exceed the requirement of needing to have at least 40% open space on the lot, and that is areas that are not devoted to building or parking, for instance. So just that was the original concern, and I'll defer to Caitlin if she wants to add anything else to that.
Hi, Andy. I don't have anything to add to that right now, but I did speak with Jennifer briefly, and I think we want to take another look at this application. So I think we're suggesting that the board, continue this matter to the next meeting.
My question is, has the applicant been apprised of this, or are they hearing this for the first time?
I believe they're now hearing this for the first time, if I'm not mistaken.
I think this is really unfortunate. If I were them, I'd be really disappointed, to say the least, because they've hung in here for, 2.5 hours only to find out they're going to be continued on something you could have told them about even earlier today. So this hasn't happened before, and I don't like it. But I understand that open space is a serious issue, especially in the densely populated part of the city. This application is actually quite relevant even to the Institution for Savings application because it backs onto Otis Place. And I really was looking forward to discussing it with them, but we will hold off until we know all the facts. And if you do find out that they tripped the trigger for open space, please circle back with them to find a solution so that when they come to see us, they have something that is viable. And I don't know if 2 weeks is enough time to come up with that solution. Andy, you think 2 weeks is enough if it turns out that they have an issue with the open space requirement and cannot go with the plan as they're proposing right now?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend 2 weeks from now. I'd like to see us close that loop by then.
Well, it's not just saying you can or you can't. I mean, if they can do it, great. But if they have a problem with open space, they're going to have to rethink what they want to do with this parking area. So, yeah, we'll put it on the agenda for next time. That doesn't. We've got a whole bunch of little things, and
yeah, if it needs to be continued,
again,
we could do it at that point.
Okay, let's give them the opportunity to be scheduled for the 18th. And if it has to be continued because they have to do more research and come up with some other solution, that'll be understandable. So I believe is it appropriate to move on without letting them speak, or should we have them speak?
Well, we have Mr. Rappaport here, I believe. I'm not seeing all of the expected attendance for this application here this evening, but perhaps.
Yeah, I'd actually like to request that Billy Welch speak on our behalf.
Is he here this evening? Oh, I see.
It might be Holly Welch.
No, that's fine. Yeah, folks don't always come up underneath their own names. So yeah, I think we've got him. Bill, are you there?
Let's definitely hear from you, please.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm Billy.
Yes, thank you.
So yeah, we've been working hard, as Caitlin knows, to come up with a plan that would address the runoff that we're experiencing right now with the gravel and dirt parking area that we have, that through rainfall and snow plowing continues to deposit pretty good amounts of the dirt and gravel that we have in the parking area onto sections of Otis Place. And part of what we've tried to do with a change or a request to change to asphalt from the dirt and gravel surface that we have, as you can see from that photo, is to create a more durable and sustainable surface in the parking area. And in doing so, eliminate the runoff that right now is creating a number of problems for our abutters who live at the end of Otis Place, right where basically at the entrance of our parking area. And the neighbors who abut our property have approved and have offered consent to our plan, because they're the ones actually in many ways that have to deal with the runoff, because it accumulates in front of their homes in the street gutter, and oftentimes have to go out and sweep it up and dispose of it. So when we met with Mr. White back in August to review some thoughts and alternatives about what we could do to mitigate runoff that would be associated with a paved parking area, meaning water more than dirt and gravel that we have now. He suggested or recommended that a vegetative or landscaping plan around the perimeter that you're looking at right now would be effective in handling the runoff that would be with a paved surface. And he suggested that we prepare a drawing, which is what you're looking at right now, that would accomplish that mitigation or that collection of water. So what you're looking at there is, which doesn't exist now, it's just a wooden fence on 3 sides that you're looking at between our property and the neighbor's property, especially in Otis Place. So what we'd be doing is adding the vegetated filter strip that at the top of the diagram would be about 18 inches wide and roughly 50 feet long, that then would connect to that area that's showing be a kind of a swale area there, or a little basin of sorts that would be filled with different vegetation to supplement the vegetation that would be along that fence line. Because the grading or slope of our parking area kind of heads that way, so water would run and be caught or collected in that vegetated filter strip that again would be filled with a range of different types of vegetation, whether it's sod grass, ornamental grass, sea grasses, ground cover. So that would be one area that would catch or collect some runoff that today is not being caught or collected. And to the left of the drawing, you see a little area there as well that doesn't exist today, that's right in the middle of a runoff area that we would build or install. That would be a slight dip there, maybe 8 inches or so, collect a little bit of water coming down what would be a wood timber wall that runs along that left side of our driveway area. Once again, to handle some of the runoff from a paved area that today is not being collected or caught or mitigated. On the right-hand side of the drawing, there's a fence line there as well that we would add some vegetation there that doesn't exist today. It's just a mix of dirt and basically the gravel that we have essentially is chipped asphalt and small pieces of stone. And it's almost a 50-50 mix of dirt and the stone and asphalt. So what's happening is with every rainstorm, with every snow plow, the surface of our parking area is being displaced and essentially distributed, for a number of feet down Otis Place. And we're trying to prevent that from happening. So we've got really 2 goals, kind of come up with a surface to our parking area that's more durable and stable than it is now. But in doing so, prevent the type of runoff that's being created now and from being deposited on Otis Place in front of the neighbors' homes. So we look at it as kind of a win-win. We get a better, higher quality upgraded parking area, but also as kind of a good neighbor policy, prevent further accumulation or deposits of debris in front of their homes. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm hoping that you could give this some further consideration in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here. And because what we have right now, honestly, is not working. It's not sustainable, and it's creating, short-term and what would be long-term disintegration and erosion problems for us in terms of the parking area that we have, but also, I guess you could call it the collateral damage of that problem is debris that's accumulating in front of our neighbors' homes that directly abut our property in Otis Place. The last thing I would say is that part of our plan, there are several large potholes right at the end of Otis Place, just before you enter our parking area, that are also continuing to disintegrate and erode. And what we would propose to do as part of our landscaping and vegetation plan would be to remove those potholes and repave that area, which would provide a much more better access, but also much better appearance for that area of Otis Place. So we're looking at what we're trying to do is improve the runoff that's now occurring, but also improve the situation and conditions of Otis Place. And we would do that paving work. Well, I guess we would propose that our paving contractor would do that work at the same time he would do our parking area, and we would do it at our cost. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I hope that's responsive to what you were looking for from some kind of input from one of the homeowners there at High Street.
Yeah, that's fine for what you were asked to do. The problem may be that you're not allowed to pave it because of this open space requirement. And that's what I was discussing with Director Port before.
Yeah, Bonnie, if I could speak to that, just to clarify it. So we have some unusual language in our zoning ordinance, but bottom line, I guess, is the issue here, and as I was pointing out in the aerial photograph, this is at the discretion of the planning board and to some extent the deference we give to the engineers that do reviews for us. But the point I was just trying to make was that, if the board is feeling comfortable with this, and again, as a minor modification, as opposed to something that would have notice to abutters to modify the original permit, it's just that if you look at the lot, irrespective of whether the current zoning ordinance allows a parking area to count as open space, which would seem illogical, the point is that going from gravel, which is what the original plan showed for that whole parking area, to asphalt for the majority or vast majority of that area would increase the coverage on the lot. And I just wanted to point that out to the board, because as you're looking at plans throughout the city, should anyone point back at this application here, especially something that might be approved by a minor modification, that essentially has a substantial amount of the lot that is essentially coverage, impervious coverage. I don't know what that would look like if every lot was given that amount of impervious coverage in the end. But that's the point I guess we wanted to make, was that you just consider that it's not a question of whether or not something fits in an open space definition or a building footprint coverage definition. The point is that the lot itself in total would have a lot of coverage. And it sounds as if John Eric White, the city engineer, feels comfortable that the thin strips around the edge of the property are sufficient for this. It just, based on a quick glance, looks a little bit much to me, without enough area to capture all that, given the amount of coverage that's already on this lot. So.
Yeah.
Bonnie, if I may,
yeah, please.
Yeah, what I was going to say, my first reaction to this, when I looked at it, is two things. I think I'd like to have someone, an engineer, whatever, doesn't have to, perhaps even preferably a stamped drawing of this, or have our city engineer, let me rephrase it, Phil Christensen, who I think understands civil engineering and drainage, take a look at it. And I understand it's gravel and it's creating some other problems on Otis, but there's also something, and I'm not going to talk about the efficacy of it, of a permeable asphaltic concrete. And so there may be a couple other ways to do this, or perhaps part of it is that way. So in my opinion, irrespective of whether this meets the coverage or not, I would like to have a bit more technical review of the solution, whatever it may be.
Anyone else want to chime in? Others agree with Don? Okay, that may take more than 2 weeks, because I know Phil can get backed up. I'm just a little concerned about putting this on for November 18th. But I also know that if they want to have it paved before the winter, they may be up against some weather conditions. So I don't know what makes the best sense. Andy, can you give us a sense of how quickly you think Phil could turn this around?
My own opinion is I would not have a problem putting in the next agenda, mainly because if Phil comes back and says, I agree with John Eric that those filter strips are sufficient around the edges, then the board could act and approve. And again, wouldn't be any objection. But if Phil thinks further review is necessary, then we would just continue from that date further out.
Motion to continue to the next meeting.
That's Ann. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Who was that?
Don.
Thank you. Further discussion. Yeah, one thing in the request to Phil, not only the plan as it is, but in relationship to the open space, if they're following up on what Don suggested, if there are alternative surface coverings that he could recommend, that would be good for the applicant and for us to know about.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. I'll take a roll call. Is there any other comments besides mine on the discussion?
This is Billy Welch again. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for listening to what I have to say on behalf of my fellow unit owners at High Street. We recognize we have a problem here, both on our own surface, but also the area of Otis Place. And if you could give us further consideration, again, including maybe other options, be much appreciated. But we feel pretty strongly that what we have right now is not working for us or for our neighbors. And if we can make a change with your support, that's something we'd really like to be able to do.
Okay, so we'll take a roll call on the motion to continue this to November 18th. Alden?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Tanya?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
MJ?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. We'll see you all back here on the 18th unless there's a reason to continue. Okay. Was there a comment coming through and I didn't hear it? No. Okay, a request for minor modification on 47 Story Ave is the Chipotle application. Let's get this presentation done. Do we have a presenter, Andy?
Yeah, Tony, are you here with us this evening?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So Tony Capichetti with Hayes Engineering, 603 Salem Street, Wakefield, Massachusetts. We were in front of the board about the same time last year, I believe, for site plan review. And one of the conditions was dealing with Mass DOT for our curb cuts. We also had to deal with them for our water service connection. And we're just trying to modify the plans based off of the DOT recommendations on the driveways. We provided your staff as well as Phil Christensen with revised plans. And I just wanted to kind of hit the highlights of the layouts. I did a summary of all the changes on the sheets. The first three sheets are pretty minor changes, basically adding the highway station baseline, the existing traffic lines out in the highway, and the standard Mass DOT certifications on the cover sheet. When you get to sheet 4, which Andy has put up for us, you see that the reconfigurations that they required included increasing the entrance radius coming from the eastbound direction on Story Ave, but narrowing the throat of that entrance. They wanted no more than 16 feet where it was a one-way circulation. As soon as we get back into our site, we open back up to the 24 feet that was proposed. And they also asked that we remove one of the parking spaces. There's on the westernmost or left-hand side of the plan. We had 11 spaces, and they worried with the new radius and narrowed throat that that 11 space, which would have been to the north or top of the plan, would create some conflict with vehicles backing in and out, which we tend to agree with. However, even though we reduced from 24 to 23 spaces, we still exceed the zoning requirement. The other items that came up were crosswalk striping. We had proposed a continental style crosswalk, which I personally think looks a lot better. However, Mass DOT is very specific as to what they want for crosswalks in their right of way, and because the majority of these crosswalks are in their right of way, they wanted 12-inch wide thermoplastic placed in parallel for a standard crosswalk configuration. Going around to the exit side, which is the easternmost or right-hand side of the plan, the width of the exit increased to 27 feet from 26 feet. However, that entire length shifted about 9 feet 6 inches to the west. And the issue that they had was when we located the pavement striping out in Story Ave, in order to maintain the left-hand turn line, we could not have the projection of the left-hand turn lane cross that painted island in any way. So that's what necessitated us shifting. Our proposal was to eliminate some of the striping out the street, which they did not take favor with. So we shifted everything 9 feet 6 inches to the west or left-hand side of the plan. And that necessitated shrinking the 3 employee parallel spaces to 20 feet from 22, but there is no requirement in the Newburyport zoning for parallel parking spaces, and those spaces are not really going to turn over except for maybe every 4 to 6 hours for employees. We added 1 space to the bank of parking to the east adjacent to Port Plaza, but that whole section shifted 3 feet 6 inches to the west away from Port Plaza, increasing the landscape buffer, as well as additional snow storage. And the abutter was quite vocal about us staying away from the fence on his property as much as possible. So that furthers that goal. Just kind of going through my list real quick. There was some minor grading changes to the curbs because obviously the curb shifted. So we adjusted to what was the existing grades there, but there was nothing that changed any drainage catchments. So we've maintained that, and we actually ended up with a minor decrease in impervious area. So our drainage system continues to work as planned. Because we ended up with a little more green space and some shifting and reduction, we modified our landscape plan that increased the amount of plantings by 9 plantings overall, 1 being a birch tree, 3 junipers, and 5 boxwoods, just to kind of maintain the overall continuity of what we had originally proposed. And if you look at the bottom of the plan, you'll see 2 squares that weren't there previously along the retaining wall. Our original plan was to tie the lighting into the top of the retaining wall. We looked into coring and epoxying the bolts into there. We assessed the wall and it didn't seem feasible, so we added 2 cast in place light post base next to the wall and mounted the lights there. Then the other changes were just adding 2 sheets for Mass DOT construction details, as they have their own specific details for driveway aprons and the like, as well as a traffic management plan for performing the work. And then the last thing would be the water service. We tried to reuse the service going under Story Avenue. We later discovered that there was a water main that runs and crosses the street and then runs through an easement on Port. However, it is a city water main, and we were allowed by the state and the city to tie into that service. I know there's a question from John Eric regarding that. However, we did receive a sign off, I'm told, from the new water superintendent, John Carey, I believe, and that work was completed as they were running off of temporary water on the surface, and we've kind of hit freezing temperatures, so they had to get that in to eliminate any possibility of freezing. So if you have any questions, I know I went kind of fast, but I know you've had a long night, so I'm trying to hit upon everything that I can. And if I missed anything, I apologize, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much. Questions from anybody?
I have some questions and actually some concerns about treating this as a minor modification. So the plan that's up in front of us right now is the plan that it was very confusing. There were 3 plans that we were looking at on the website. This is the plan at the bottom of the list of plans that's on the project website. And it says it's approved, dated November 3rd, 2020. But in fact, this plan is dated July 8th, and it's the plan that was issued for a Mass DOT permit. And the plan that was included with the request for modification was dated July 21st and has a different layout. The driveway is narrower. Instead of having a double loaded exit, it has a single loaded exit. So I don't think the plan that's in front of us right now is the plan that we're being asked to approve. That's my first concern. I'm very concerned. In the approved plan, there was a triangle of landscaping that jutted out to the right of the proposed outdoor seating area. And that's where a pedestrian would stand to cross the travel aisle to get to those parking spaces. And that's no longer there. And if you recall, when we approved this, one of my requests was for that exit sign that's next to the building to be changed to something that says warning or look out for pedestrians or something like that. Now, if somebody's coming out of the building to run across the parking lot to their parking space with the food that they've picked up, there's absolutely no warning for a driver who's leaving the drive-in window. And it's a really wide layout. So I think this has significantly reduced the safety of the plan that we approved. And we talked a lot about that plan and how that exit was going to happen from how pedestrians are going to walk out of the building to the parking spaces. So that's something I'm very concerned about. The addition of the parking space, which is now numbered number 1 at the top right, that reduces the landscape strip from somewhere between 4 and 5 feet to about 1.5 feet or maybe less. And so, first of all, I don't think there's enough soil there to have that shrubbery that's going to be there thrive. And second, there's absolutely no buffer between the car doors and the shrubbery. So those people who are getting out of their cars are going to open their driver's side door into the shrubbery, and it's just going to get destroyed. So I think that's a bad thing. As you note, that we have 3 more parking spaces than we need, I think. So I think it'd be better just to eliminate that parking space and get the landscaping back. And then the other thing I'm concerned about is the 2 parking spaces that are now in the place. There used to be a big landscaped area next to the sign in front of the building, and that's been taken over by 2 parking spaces now. So there's no landscaping to speak of between the street and the outside seating area. There's a small row of bushes, again, with a very narrow planting strip there. But also, I would think that cars are just going to run into that planter. There's no buffer between, with a car overhang, there's no buffer between the edge of the parking space and the planter. So I think there's a lot of problems with this new plan. I don't have any issues with, I'm sorry that you had to move the exit driveway west, but obviously I can't speak to what there's a couple things that I don't like about what Mass DOT is requiring. That's one of them. But I think that if you're going to do this, you need to somehow solve the safety issues and landscaping issues on the interior of the site. So, and I think we really need to clarify what plan we're being asked to approve, because I don't think it's this one. I think it's a different plan. And unless I'm mistaken, that this plan is, I said, dated 13 days earlier than the plan that's in the that's issued for construction that's in our request for tonight's meeting. That's all.
Would you please respond to all that before anybody else has anything to say?
Right, so I'm trying to pull up the previously approved plans, but what we did was we did shrink down the area for the proposed outdoor seating and provided a 4-foot wide strip next to that would allow a pedestrian to queue to either traverse to the 2 spaces or cross. Something that we could do is, if it was the board's decision to eliminate space number 1, we could slide 4 feet down and provide a 5-foot strip kind of next to in between where space 2 and 3 are, and provide a striped crosswalk when we do the crosswalk striping to increase safety there. The landscaping in that area, they're pretty small trees. We're talking about boxwood trees, which can be maintained and trimmed back. The concern about car doors opening into the boxwood trees, they're 9-foot wide spaces. I mean, that's a pretty standard space, and you know that your standard car is about 7.5 feet. You should be able to open your door without significantly impacting those plantings. And the same with the planter. We have a vertical granite curb in front of an 18-foot deep space, which should not be an issue with vehicles running into the planter. There's about an 18-inch overhang, but again, we could add some bollards in front of that if that was a concern. I'm just trying to track through the plan that we're seeking to have approved should be the one that was provided as approved by Mass DOT. And I believe the one that's on the screen is the approved Mass DOT plan. From the look
Yeah,
of it.
this is Andy. I think I wasn't sure exactly what Rick was referring to. There's 2 different copies I think that are posted. There's one that has some hatch marks or clouds on it. But I believe that's the same as the Mass DOT plan. It's just that it's got the additional markings on it. Perhaps, I don't know if Rick, is that what you're referring to?
This is actually not the same as the Mass DOT. It's not the same as the plan you were showing earlier. The driveway is narrower on this plan. This only has a single loaded exit. The other one showed a double loaded exit. I mean, those are the key things. And so I just want to make sure that that everybody's aware of what plan we're supposed to be approving.
I apologize. The architect made the submittal, and that plan with the revision clouds was something that was done internally when they were pricing out the revisions. And that's why there's revision clouds on them. And the actual approved plans are the wider exit with the 2 lanes of traffic exiting.
That's not what the title block says. I mean, that's what's confusing me. The title block had, so this one, the one you showed us earlier was dated July 8th. This one in the title block, that was revision number 8. Revision number 9 was issued for permit on July 17th and then issued for construction on July 21st. So this is 2 revisions later. This is the one that you submitted for a request for modification, but it's 2 revisions later than the one you were showing us earlier when you were describing it. And there are very significant differences in it. And I like this one better in some respects, but I just want to make sure of what we're actually being asked to approve.
Well, I think that's a good point, Rick, you make. I mean, is there some sort of discrepancy in the submission that was given? Because if the Mass DOT plans are the ones that you're looking for the approval on and the ones that you submitted for the modification don't jive with those, then it sounds like there's maybe something wrong with the submission, no?
And I am.
And you can tell the difference because when you look at next to parking space number 1, I mean, there's a number of differences, but next to parking space number 1, you can see that right where the R15 is there, from there to the curb, looks like it's about 8 feet. You know, the area that says VGC transition, from the curve to the end of the ramp is about 8 feet. And on the other one, that's like half the distance. And that's because this has a narrower driveway, which is good.
The plans approved by Mass DOT are the ones revised through July 8th. I'm looking at their site.
So
I'm
I think
just
we need
trying
to
to figure
clarify
out.
this. Yeah, because this is definitely not what you're showing on your application, and your application does show 2 subsequent revision dates.
No, it's, and again, I apologize. I didn't make the filing myself, and I'm going to have to, at this point, request a continuance just so I can go through the file and take a look and see.
Okay, do you need anything more than 2 weeks to do that in? Should we
No,
put
I should be able to get the answer to you in a couple of days, and then with the board's permission, I can coordinate with Phil Christensen and make sure that if I sent him the wrong plans, that we'll.
And what about your response to Rick? Are you going to, what of that are you planning to incorporate, if any, into this revised plan if you revise it?
If the board would entertain a quick straw poll as to whether the loss of the parking space is more preferable with the crosswalk or the additional parking spaces preferred, just so, you know, well, I appreciate Mr. Tainer's comment. I just want to make sure that the majority of the board is in agreement. And if they are, I have no problem making that revision, but I don't want to proceed and find out that the rest of the board prefers that we maintain 23 spaces instead of 22.
So just to be clear, what I was saying, there's 3 things that I was requesting you to consider. One is the sign that is at the after the driving window that says direction sign exit. That was supposed to say something like watch for pedestrians or something like pedestrians crossing, some sign that alerts people that people are going to be running across with food in their hands.
Yep.
The second one was to try to get some of that bump out back next to the outdoor seating area so that a pedestrian can stand visually in front of the people leaving the drive-through before stepping off the curb into the parking lot. And the third was getting rid of parking space number 1, so you have a reasonable amount of space to put the landscaping in. I don't really care about a crosswalk across the parking lot. I don't think that's going to be useful, but just to have something that is physically puts the pedestrian in the view of the drivers would be a big help.
And at this point, to clarify, you have 3 extra spaces. So if you lost 1 parking, you would still be within the requirement.
That's correct. I just, like I said, I just wanted to make sure that every board's different, and some boards look at, you know, extra parking spaces as a net benefit versus.
We look at any screening, landscaping is the benefit, and the safety of the pedestrians on site is first priority. So I support Rick's suggestions. Anybody have any other comments or?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
This is MJ. I'm just concerned about the minor modification issue. Is it now a minor modification or?
Well, this is Andy. In my opinion, this is definitely the changes that are being discussed, I think, are minor in nature, provided the adjustments that Rick had mentioned, I think, can be incorporated. I do think that they can be treated as minor.
I just hope so for the applicant's sake, that we don't come back next time and say, oh no, this is major. I just want to.
Yeah,
I would
and MJ, I
suggest-
did hear Rick say that, and I agree with you. I view this as minor. I wasn't sure whether Rick was just flagging that or whether he thought it was a major, but I think it's a minor modification.
So my point of view was that if it came through like this, I wouldn't consider it minor. But if we return some of the things that we've lost from the approved plan, then I think we could call it minor.
And Rick, just to be clear, would I be correct in saying if the changes were made, what you just suggested, that's what you're referring to, right?
Yes.
As going back to the original plan, even though it's
Not
slightly different?
not necessarily going back to the original plan, but
But it has a functionality or whatever,
yes,
however you want to.
exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. You know, I'm on the same page with you, Rick.
And not to drop it, there's another issue. Rick, you brought up special permit number 2, where we have the incorrect exit sign. That hasn't been fixed in anything you've said, right?
No, I did mention that as as the first thing, that to change that sign that says direction sign exit to say something like warning for pedestrians or something like that.
That was the sign. I was wondering which one you were talking about. Okay, so that'll fix that issue.
Yep.
Okay.
This is Andy. I would just suggest for the next meeting, I realize that there might have been a desire here to submit what the architect thought were the modified sheets, and then the entire Mass DOT curb cut set of plans. But I think it might make sense, just for the board's clarity and for the applicant's benefit in expediting the next review of this, to submit only the drawing sheets from the original plan set that have changed, and where those changes are, rather than potentially even leaving the risk of having discrepancies in the plan sets, which seems to be what we have this evening.
If the board would entertain it, I can put new revision dates just issued for modification on those sheets that have changed, so there will be no confusion going forward either.
Okay. If there's no further input, I will take a motion to continue this to November 18th.
I would make that motion.
Okay, Rick, second?
I'll second, Alden.
Thanks, Alden. So we'll just do a roll call on this decision. Alden,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. So we'll see you back on the 18th, 2 weeks from
Thank you.
now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
We've had a request to not here tonight, but continue for reserve at Bashaw Farm, the request for release of a covenant. And that's also for the 18th. I know we have a lot on the 18th, but they're sort of little things. They may add up to 3 hours, but I think we can handle it. So could I have a motion?
Motion to continue till the 18th.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Second?
I'll second, Alden.
Thank you. And I'll call roll. Alden,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Anne,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. And last, 2 more things. Approval of the minutes from 10:21. I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Don. Second?
Alden, I'll second.
Thank you. Any comments from anybody?
This is Tanya. I had a few comments and I'll just send them out. But one thing I wanted to just note for the record is I actually was on the meeting right after roll call, but I wasn't allowed into the meeting. So I did not arrive at 7:20. I arrived at probably 7 o'clock or 7:05.
But could you hear what we were discussing?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, great.
Yeah, no, I was on there. I was listening to the full discussion. I still wanted to seem like I missed any of the discussion. I didn't. I literally
No.
came on as you guys were, but because I am inept at finding the correct Zoom link that I'm supposed to be using and properly pasting it into my calendar invite, I did not, I was not able to get into the meeting, so.
All right. You are
So I
duly
will send you,
forgiven.
I liked how that conversation was in the minutes. Thank you for that. So
Yeah.
anyway, I do know how to cut and paste and create my own calendar invites. I was just trying to make my life easier. So anyway,
your
I
comment-
will send the rest of my comments out.
And they are, they're not anything substantive that we should know about?
You know, the one was just that I thought was on the Institute for Savings when I had mentioned the tree planting, and that's why I clarified tonight. I had meant the people who live on Garden Street. That's the street that's right abuts, And I think I had said Prospect. And
No,
so
I
that
think you're
there's,
talking of, are you talking about the one where Mark and Claire live?
yeah, but that's Otis Place. But what about the one behind them? That's Garden Street.
That's Garden. So you really,
Okay, so
really did mean Garden.
I did mean Garden. So I mean Otis Place and Garden. So there's like that building that's right at Garden, and there's trees there in their backyard, and it goes to Mark's house, Mark and Claire's house. And I think we've talked, I feel like every meeting I've said I'd like to see some screening there, and it just never gets picked up. That's all. So
okay. So you want
anyway, so that I just wanted to clarify, because that was a misspoke on my part, and I think that's it. There's nothing else that was substantial. So
Well, Tanya, I
Okay.
just made that correction.
okay, good. And I feel like there might have been something else.
Okay.
I'm just going through. I was making edits, and now I don't feel like they're in my. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's it. There was one clarification, and I'll just send that off to you.
Okay,
All right, thanks.
I just have a question or comment to all the members. If in fact we said something, and that's how the recorded minutes, is it your all understanding that the minutes would reflect not what you said, but what you meant to say? Because candidly, I think the minutes should reflect what we said.
Yeah. I think that's what they're meant for. I mean, it's instead of doing a recording, we have a recording. And that's what we said. So if you're correcting something that you misspoke, you can't, I don't think you can do that, can you?
I think that's my point. And I'm not saying Tanya, that's Tanya's case, but.
Well, no, it is. I mean, I did have the street wrong.
Personally, I think that's the minutes myself, but that's just, I'll defer to someone else. But I think the minutes reflect what you said, not what you meant to say.
But if we're here, let me play devil's advocate. If we're reviewing the minutes for final approval, could we not add a note to make it clear that we made a mistake?
Yeah, this is Andy. I would suggest just a minor footnote, just to clarify that.
I would agree with that. If you put a footnote or in parenthetical subsequently,
Yeah.
whatever meant to say this, that's fine. But just to make the change without reference, I don't think it makes sense to me.
You're right. And especially if they're recordings and it's something as sensitive as that particular public hearing, someone could pick it up. So yeah, this is really good. And I'm glad that more people are taking an interest in looking at the minutes to make sure that at least what you said is what you meant to say. I found an issue, and I'm not sure, Don, how you handled it when you reviewed the minutes after I did.
I sent it back to you because I actually,
Your changes, all it says is a red line, and then there's like all this writing, like it was the standard the way it was. So we may have changed the wording in there, is what I'm getting at.
I think in that particular instance, when I heard Lisa speak, it was very interesting. She did not say that she was eliminating all the entrances. I think she was very specific, and I will agree that my sense of the inference of most of the planning board members and you was that she said, oh, we're limiting everything on Prospect. And I really don't think she said that. Now, I didn't go back to actually listen to the recording, so I would defer to you or Linda, but I know exactly what you meant on that.
Okay, what did she say, Linda?
She said exactly what I wrote. I listened to it 3 times.
And that was that they were going to eliminate all the entrance exits onto Prospect?
She said exactly what I wrote. Let me just
I don't
call
know
it
what
up.
it was.
I even time-stamped it in my notes.
Yeah, because I know that it was, came up as a question later and then it got clarified, and I realized, because I had heard her say no exits onto Prospect.
So when I saw Dawn's comment about correcting that, and your comment about correcting it, I wanted to just point out that her misstatement was repeated 2 or 3 times by her again, and then I think by Chris Angelakis. And I just wanted to know if I was going to change it in that one spot or note it, should I find all those other spots too?
No, I guess again, to me, is if she said that I'll admit I'm wrong, but then you should record what she said. Then later on, if some other person said a half hour later that here's what it is, then I think you just need to put that. You don't even have, to me, you don't have to put a footnote, because later on during the conversation, someone corrects that what one of the other preceding speakers spoke about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to go. Back to Plan A, which is what Linda wrote in the first place. Take out any changes that I suggested that Don did and go back to her original statement. And I did look later on, and somebody brought it up and she clarified. And that's when I made the request that it be closed. And that led to, all this discussion about what does the fire department have against that. So anyway, so that clarifies that you just write what she says.
Yep.
Okay. And the record does show the correction. They corrected their statements.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So motion was, anything else on minutes? Okay, we'll take the vote, the roll call. Alden?
Yes.
Beth? Hello, Beth.
Yep, sorry, yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Tanya?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
MJ?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. And we still have 6C final draft review. It's not particularly urgent. Could we continue that?
I'd like to make just a couple quick points on that.
I know, but if we start making points on, I've got 3 issues that Jennifer had as well.
Jennifer, those are the 3 issues, but there's just a question that I have, a quick question, which is on the very last page, the very last paragraph. I thought we said $10 per square foot, and that's
another thing we want to discuss, and that's a bigger discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was, if it wasn't too late, Jennifer would have come on. I don't think she did. And so we don't, I'll try to get her here for the.
Jennifer is here this evening. I don't know. I'll defer to you, Chair, on whether you want to discuss the matter tonight.
I think we're really knackered, right? Or do people want to just get it over with? It could be another 15 minutes.
I personally am okay with staying on, but whatever the rest of the board wants to do.
Should we just get it over with?
If it's 15,
Yeah, we might as well.
Okay, Andy, can you bring it up and let's do it? And we can start the discussion on an issue that we all know about, which is what Rick was bringing up. The trust, the housing trust suggested $30 per square foot. And I remember when Tanya and Don suggested 10, they just put a number in there, or at least that was my impression. I may be wrong, but
no, we had, no, we had put 10 in because we felt like when you looked at the reasonable amount, like most additions were 2,500 square feet or more, that that would be, I don't know, a sufficient amount of money. We didn't want to overdo it. 30, I think, is high.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So, so should we try 420?
I thought
for whatever it's worth, as Tanya said, we did spend a bit of time trying to look into some other towns, municipalities, and doing some extrapolations, interpolations, and it's very difficult to get a one-on-one. And I think we kind of agreed in 10. I thought it could have been a little bit more, but surely $30 we both think was way above board.
Well, you also have to think about how much. So that's $25,000 at 10 on a 2,500 square foot structure. That's not a lot of money for the housing trust. they can't do very much with it. So the idea would be that they'd have to accumulate a few of these before they could do, say, a down payment for an affordable unit.
I don't think the
Yes.
idea was that this was gonna fund one of these was gonna fund a down payment. I think that, you got to also look at, at I feel like 30 is too much. I think that's asking too much for
No,
this.
I think we should
agree.
stay with the original 10. Because didn't we have a committee look into this and that's what they came up with?
Yeah, that's why Tanya and Don are
Yeah,
speaking
I
up.
think that's reasonable.
Yeah, and I thought so as well, given that you had accumulated and before to make an appropriate amount.
Okay. Any arguments for anything other than 10? Then
Going
10
once?
Yeah, 10's it. That's easy. Okay, we have Jennifer with us. Thank you for coming. Can you get yourself unmuted somehow? And make your 3 questions. And Andy, show us where she's talking.
Yeah, Jennifer, you want to go point by point?
If somebody had that, I thought you were going to speak to them, Bonnie.
Well, I was going to if you weren't here, but start with AII or whatever it is, way up at the top, Andy. Just scroll up. Yeah.
Yep.
Here, I don't have your proposal in front of me, but I think you were, this is what I wanted you to do, was just to make your proposals for changes. Do you remember
Both,
what you were gonna do?
I'm reading it. Both residential units shall comply with the setback requirements for principal buildings. I think my question just was, perhaps it was in regard to some where we've seen and where it's one is behind the other. How does the rear one comply to front yard setbacks and things? Maybe.
Actually, Jennifer, I think your specific recommendation was to change the word principal to two-family.
To two-family.
Okay, thank you.
I hadn't realized, this is another peculiar thing about our zoning ordinance, that we have different setbacks for different uses. And so I just think, most zoning ordinances where I've worked, you have a setback for a district and that applies to any use there. I think actually, because these are going to be, I like the idea of tying it to a specific use, but I would rather go with a single family rather than a two-family. The only difference is the side setback, and the side setback for a two-family in the R2 district is 20 feet versus 10 feet. So, my preference would be to go for single family, but if you have a strong feeling about two-family, I don't really have a strong feeling.
I actually would support that because if we are building 2 single-family structures, in theory, they are scaled as single-family structures. So.
Right. So change principal to single family or one family.
Thank you for pulling those up as well.
Yeah. Okay. So Andy, can you change that now to single family, please?
Yeah. Jennifer, do you want to speak to the second point, or?
I was curious, having not been part of the conversation, to know where the 300 came from. It would seem more consistent with me where we have 500 square foot as a trigger for special permit for nonconformity, where it was something under that was seemingly a modest addition that didn't trigger. I thought it might make sense to use the same number, but again, 300 may have come from somewhere else.
300 came from Rick and he doesn't care.
Yeah, I had a question on that too, but now I know where it came from.
So what is the conclusion on that?
Go to 500.
Yeah, for consistency.
Yeah.
All right, sold. Right.
I just learned a lesson. Do all this stuff at 10:30 at night. It's so easy. Okay, so 300 will go to 500. Good. And then there's one more. There's a
Yep.
B. There it is.
It's not an approval not required plan if they are making these accommodation or, they would do an approval not required or a conventional subdivision if they could, but they can't, and therefore they're before you for 6C.
Right, and we're just asking for them as a reference point, I believe.
So Jennifer, the only difference that I see is if you did a conventional subdivision, you'd have to put a big road in there. And so it might be better not to do a conventional subdivision for a 2 dwelling unit thing. But I get your point about approval not required.
Well, I think Jennifer's, if I'm not mistaken, I guess Jennifer's point was that why would somebody bother to go through the hassle of a discretionary permit and any obligations or questions there if they could actually divide to get the 2 lots that they need by approval not required or a conventional subdivision that as long as it meets the regs has to be approved.
Well,
Precisely.
And my point was that it's much more costly to do a conventional subdivision because you have to build a bigger road.
But none of any project that's coming before you for a 6C, presumably, you're thinking, I've never seen a 6C that would have qualified for a conventional subdivision plan.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, complete the whole thing then.
And we don't need those for reference in terms of just what else you might have done, but you chose not to, saying that you wouldn't choose not to if you could do one of those, right?
I think this provision makes more sense in the context of an OSRD where the project's large enough to have someone who could do a by right development, but what you're trying to do is get them to consolidate the development to one portion of a site. I think that maybe there was an attempt here to parallel that thinking, but I think it doesn't, to Jennifer's point, if we look through the 6Cs that the board's approved over the years, I don't think we'll see a project where somebody could have done something by right, but chose to go through a discretionary process instead.
So this is basically overkill and unnecessary.
Yep.
Okay, scratch it. Anything else that anyone sees in here or had when they were reading it that needs adjusting?
I have a question on the next provision. When the lot contains blah, 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 I'm bad. Permanent preservation restriction on said building approved.
Yep.
Well, how about meeting the standards of Mass Historic?
Yeah, they
Is
go
it-
till midnight sometimes.
Haven't we had this conversation where if you get a Mass Historic preservation restriction, the threshold is much higher than what the Newburyport Historic Commission might
Supposed to
hold?
work, but I'll get out of it.
This is Andy. Can I speak to
I'll
that?
get out.
Do it before the.
Yeah, somebody's talking. Okay, yeah.
I think it's a good point you raise. However, I think that is addressed by the language because it requires the preservation restriction here to be permanent or perpetual. And that per state statute really requires Mass Historical to approve it. So in effect, the word permanent is forcing it to be approved by Mass Historical. The reference explicitly to the Historic Commission is the one that's requiring it to be approved locally. But in essence, that paragraph or that provision would require it to be approved by Mass Historical as well. So essentially both approvals are needed.
Well, should we add that perhaps?
I don't think there's any problem adding that phrasing, but I don't think it's necessary either. It's up to you guys. I don't really care.
Well, it
I'd
turns
rather
out,
have Mass Historic in there because,
Do you want
well,
to say both? I mean, we could just reference
well,
both.
as it turns out, Mass Historic always works with the local historic commission. They always ask for their input. So that's included. So if you put, first of all, change permanent to perpetual and then approved by Mass Historic, the local historic district commission is taken care of.
okay, but you would put in Mass Historic?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Because there are well, first of all, they're not perpetual. They're usually 30-year ones, are held by the local historic commission. And there could be some confusion here if you use Newburyport Historic Commission here instead of Mass Historical. So yeah, change it.
Okay, I'll defer to you as board. This is the change that you're proposing to the council, but I don't know that, to me, I would actually recommend both, because I think what the setup here is in Newburyport, what the attempt is here is to try to have our local commission be the local experts, so that I guess I wouldn't take out the reference to the local commission. It would make sense to me that it's approved by both. You know, you wouldn't necessarily want to defer only to Mass Historical should there be maybe a dispute with the local commission that perhaps knows Newburyport better. I don't know, just a thought about that.
Yeah, you could say approved by the Newburyport Historic Commission and meeting the standards of Mass Historic, because correct me if I'm wrong, the local commission could hold a preservation restriction and the requirements could be less stringent than Mass Historic. Is that correct or
Yes.
incorrect?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, then I would add that, meeting the standards of Mass Historic. Just to make sure that what we're preserving under this are really significant historic properties.
So, and would it be meeting the standards, or would it be that it's held in perpetuity by the Mass Historic?
Well, to Dawn, the Mass Historical isn't in the habit, as far as we know, in the near term anyway, they're not in the habit of accepting new ones if they can have them accepted at the local level or held at the local level, because of the additional workload and the limited resources. So I think the expectation is from Mass Historical of late is that the local commission would hold it anyway. To me, I think this question here is simply resolved by, as Bonnie suggested, changing permanent to perpetual and referencing both the local historic commission and Mass Historical in that paragraph. That covers both approvals. In the typical process, both would be required anyway. As someone pointed out a second ago, Mass Historical will be looking to the local commission. The local commission would have an exchange with Mass Historical about anything where there was overlap, but essentially you'd want the more stringent, I presume, to apply.
Exactly. So I think that's a good change.
Anything else, anybody? Do we trust Andy to write this all up as we've said, and we approve the final draft tonight? Or you want to see it again?
I don't want to see it again.
I trust him with my soul.
Okay, yeah, right, yeah, good luck. It must be late. And we don't have a sponsor yet. He's working on Heather Shand. So who knows when it's going to come forward, but the sponsor will be identified, and I suppose we'll hear about it if we're lucky.
I'd like to thank the members who worked on this. It's really nice to get it cleaned up.
I second that. But first we need a motion to what?
Approve as amended.
Approve as amended this zoning ordinance, this zoning amendment. Anne, would you like to make it?
Yes, so
Okay.
moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Rick. And I will call roll. Alden?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Tanya?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
MJ?
I need to abstain. I wasn't there.
For any of it?
Well, not the last major meeting. I was there at the beginning.
Okay, and you didn't hear it?
No.
Okay. Don?
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. Okay. Any further updates, Andy?
None, I think, that are noteworthy at this hour now.
Thank you, Andy.
All right. I don't have anything else. Anyone else? Then we'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Alden.
Second?
Tanya?
Yeah.
I'll call.
Second.
You always love to adjourn.
I thought Anne was always the one who wanted to adjourn.
Tanya as well.
It's usually me, I know.
They fight for it. Okay, so Tanya got it with Ann's help and MJ's reinforcement, and that shall be shown. No, it will not be shown in the record. Okay, taking the roll. Alden,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes, please.
Tanya,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
MJ,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. Thank you all for hanging in there. It's not
Thank
getting
you.
any easier, but we've got good experience, so we'll depend on that.
Right.
Night.
Thanks,
night.
guys. Good night.
Night,
Night.
everybody.
Good night.
Night.